those banners going up the side of the wall. The red one, of course, is the president. Somehow the Republicans got the red number. I hope it wasn't during the Cold War. They got the red color. The Democrats, of course, have the blue color. That's John Kerry this time. Both fighting up to the 14th floor they're going for. That will be victory. That will be 270 electoral votes. And don't be confused by these numbers. We've got a lot of numbers floating around tonight. This is going to be a long night, including a long night for counting the states that everybody who pays attention knows are going to be so close because the country's so close. This isn't mathematics. This is popular will. We've got a vote going on in Florida that's so close. We've got a vote in Ohio that's so close. Pennsylvania, where I come from, that was supposed to be a Democratic state a few weeks ago. That's so close. We don't even have a result in New Hampshire yet, much less do we have results in the Midwest yet. It's just because it's not incompetence on anybody's part. It's caution. And it's also the fact that in the history of re-elections, this may be the first real close re-election of a president in modern times. Usually it's a slam dunk for your dad when he beat my old boss. Yep. And when I was a speechwriter 100 years ago, and it's usually a race where you come back in big like Reagan did the second time, or you get bounced like Carter rather painfully like George Bush's father got knocked out there. It's never like this. And we wait for this thing to take form and somebody pulls out. I've been hearing for weeks, somebody's going to pull away. Nobody pulls away, do they?
Nobody pulled away. I think intensity and all these new voters, we're still waiting for some very important states where the polls closed 40 minutes ago. Colorado, Michigan, New Mexico, Wisconsin. When are we going to find out? These are important states.
We're going to talk, and we got a little more time later tonight about whether it's because the president won the presidency the way he did 4 years ago, whether it's personality, whether it's the war, whether it's a lot of things that cause people to reserve judgment, really, or to split their judgment. It's so interesting. Let's go right to Tom Costello, who's out in Colorado right now, for a look at that state you just mentioned. Tom.
Hi, Chris. Thank you. We are with the Coors campaign here. They're hoping it's going to be a celebration. They are convinced that, in fact, President Bush will take Colorado. All the polls going into today pretty much suggested that. It's a real nail-biter for them, though, on the Senate race. Peter Coors, the Republican, and, of course, the chairman and CEO of the Coors Brewing Company, is in a very tough fight against Ken Salazar. The polls going into today, the Rocky Mountain News poll, had Ken Salazar, the Democratic Attorney General, beating Peter Coors. It is a tough, very tight race, and a few minutes ago I actually talked to the man who is vacating that seat, Senator Ben Nighthorse Campbell, the Republican, who says he feels a little bit guilty about, he says, possibly putting his seat in jeopardy because it is such a tight race. And while the Republicans here said that they have some internal numbers saying that they still believe Coors will win, they also admit it is in fact a nail-biter. The other issue that is very important to Coloradans is Amendment 36. That amendment would divvy up proportionally the state's electoral votes, 9 electoral votes. As you know, the candidates have spent a lot of time in Colorado this year trying to get those 9 votes. The concern among both Republicans and Democrats is that if that amendment were to pass, Colorado would see its electoral vote diluted. The most recent news article just came out from the Associated Press indicates an Associated Press survey believes that that amendment will fail. That is consistent with what we have seen in the polls here in Colorado over the course of the past few weeks. In fact, most Coloradans have indicated that they will vote that one down. So again, the most recent data here indicates that the president is in a tight race here, but likely, according to most of the polls, to come away with a win. But the nail-biter is for the Senate seat being vacated right now by, of course, Ben Nighthorse Campbell. Chris, back to you.
Let me ask you, Tom, a question before we leave you tonight. The Latino vote, how significant is it out there in Colorado tonight?
The Latino vote is critical. In fact, I talked to one senior Republican who said that Peter Coors has got to win the Latino vote along the western slope of Colorado, the Mesa counties down in the south and Pueblo County. Being a kid from Denver, I can tell you that the Latino vote has become more and more and more important over the course of the past few years. It is going to be very critical for whoever wins tonight.
Okay, thank you very much, Tom Costello, out in Colorado, a state we're going to be watching for that Senate race, if nothing else. Let's go right now to Joe Trippi. Joe, you're in a world many of us are just learning about. The website battles, the noise level. When you get a vote out there, what do you make of it? Is it always leaning to the left? I mean, I'm going to ask you, who's winning that battle among bloggers as to who's supposed to win tonight or who they want to win?
Well, I mean, it's a lot of the polls have showed for quite some time that Kerry was doing better with this group, particularly younger voters, and particularly internet people. And then Zogby did a survey a few nights ago about cell phone users and found a significant lead for Kerry as well. The one thing that we're finally getting some answers from, just sort of looking at the exits, USA Today just came out and said that youth vote, in their view, has doubled from last year. We don't know yet for sure, but they're saying that it was 10% of the vote last year. It looks like it's going to be upwards of 17% this year, which means a huge, sort of confirming what we've seen all along from our citizen journalists that have been reporting from across the country. We had one report from Ohio State student talking about how students were studying in line and really and were standing in line studying for 4 hours. Another poll worker in Ohio, Columbus, Ohio, saying since 1988 has worked every poll, has never seen anything like the number of young people standing in line to vote in her polling place. So it's clear, I think we're starting to see real evidence that there was an increase in the youth vote, and where we can measure it, it looks to have been a big lead for Kerry among those voters.
Doesn't it stun you that a kid who's 18 years old and maybe he's read the newspaper for a year or two at the most has as much clout as somebody 75 years old who's been studying issues for 50 years? Doesn't it amaze you how democratic our system is, Joe Trippi?
It is, and that's why I think this really is Generation E. It's the empowered generation. They've got this tool, the internet. They know how to talk to each other. They know how to communicate to each other. They know how to distribute information to each other. And I still think before the night's out, we're going to see them be big players in at least 1 or 2 Senate races across the country, and maybe perhaps pull a state or two out for Senator Kerry. We'll see.
I mean, you're enthusiastic about it, and you're boosting it a bit, but 17% as opposed to 10% hardly sounds like a thundercloud of change. Do you think that differential of 7 points is going to change history or change the results of the election tonight?
Well, we're looking at a very close election, and these states can be decided by 1%. So every one of those moves up from 10 to 11, 12, 13, 14, all the way up to 17% could very well make the difference, particularly when you hear these stories that we're getting from our citizen journalists in Ohio of kids standing in line, studying 4 hours and not leaving, and they're going to cast their vote. And you're right, it's an amazing thing that an 18, 19, 20-year-old has just as much power as anybody else in this country. I think it's great.
It's a humbling reality, Joe Trippi, for all of us of all ages. It's a humbling reality to know that all votes count equally. Anyway, Joe Trippi, thanks for joining us from the blogging website, where we're going to come back just after this short break. Norah O'Donnell has gone upstairs to the White House, to where the president and his family live together, his daughters, his wife, Laura, of course, the First Lady, and is going to give us a sneak preview of their moods up there upstairs at the White House. Norah O'Donnell reporting when we come back in just a minute. There it is, the Senate call. We got to make this one. Inez Tenenbaum, who fought a courageous fight, but up against a big geographical and cultural threat, the reality of southern South Carolina being a conservative Republican state, and she's not a conservative Republican, Joe.
Exactly, and also, you know, and the thing is, I got a lot of friends in South Carolina, but also a bit more difficult running as a conservative woman against a conservative man.
Yeah, usually people want the real thing when they go for a conservative. They want a Republican.
A conservative. And if I could just really briefly, Tom Coburn winning in Oklahoma is creating shockwaves right now through the Senate. Denny Hastert and the Republican leadership did not want Tom Coburn, a Republican, to win that seat because he's a fiscal conservative. He's going to be raising hell. It's going to be an amazing story there in the Senate.
Interesting inside view there of what the people think of him inside. They're taking a look here now at the Bush family. There's the president, his daughter, I guess a boyfriend. It's interesting. What a group. What a comfortable looking picture. There's the president. very formally dressed, of course, so with his white shirt and tie, laughing, smiling to the cameras. Of course, over to the right, Nora O'Donnell, give us a sense of that picture.
Well, the president did talk to reporters. I know you can't hear the audio there, but invited the pool up to the yellow room in the residence, where there was a sign of confidence that this White House wanted to project. The president saying, "I think I will win tonight." The president saying, "I think it will be over tonight." This White House, of course, has been fielding a lot of questions about anxiety out in the field from other Republicans, how they're doing in those mega states, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Florida. This is a White House. This is a campaign that's battling impressions out there. They say that some of the exit poll numbers that are out there are not tracking with the real votes that are coming in, and so they wanted to put the president out in order to send this message that they feel good, that they're not worried. And the president very strongly saying he thinks he's going to win tonight and that there's going to be an announcement. It is still noteworthy that the president is enjoying some family time. You saw he was surrounded there by family, his daughters, his mother, Dora Bush, his brother Neil Bush, and his wife, as well as his twin daughters, of course, and Marvin Bush, all sort of gathered there. But in another room, they're all having a buffet dinner, celebrating with other friends and family, while most of the top advisors are down in the Roosevelt room, the war room, eating pizza and snacks, trying to deliver information as Karl Rove is shuttling between those two places, delivering the president up-to-date information. One other note, Chris, the president's been busy working the phones. I mean, he's not just enjoying himself up there dining on this buffet. He's been calling his campaign manager, Ken Melman, getting the latest on the turnout figures and all matching them up with these exit poll numbers that they think are bunk. In their words, or screwy, as one other official put it. And the president has also been speaking with his brother, who's not here tonight but is still in Florida, Governor Jeb Bush, who's been feeding what aides say are positive information that he says he thinks they're doing very well in Florida. Chris?
Okay, thank you very much, Nora O'Donnell. Let's listen now to what the president had to say in that photo op.
Well, very upbeat, thank you.
You're going to get a winner tonight?
I believe I will win. Thank you very much. I feel good about it. I'm glad to be able to watch the returns here with my family and friends, and it's going to be an exciting evening. All right, thank you all. Thank you all very much.
That's Andrew, you've covered the White House. What do you make of that? It's such an interesting kind of phenomenon. We go and we take it. They give us a peek of the private life, which obviously that's not the way they're sitting during the evening right now.
Well, that's to communicate to their supporters some confidence and to reflect, of course, the power of the incumbency. They are there in the White House. They've got the real estate. Chris?
Okay, that's called possessed as 90% of the law. Let's go right now to where this campaign election night stands right now. Let's go to Chip Reed right now. He's talking about the long lines in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. Chip Reed.
That's right, Chris. There and a lot of other places. You know, some of the terrible things that were predicted for this election day didn't happen. Electronic machines did not go down in a big way. They had little isolated problems here and there, but there was not a disaster on that front. Probably the biggest impression out there for the average voter was the length of the lines. Bucks County, you mentioned, Berks County, Pennsylvania, Amity Township up to 4 hours. Knox County, Ohio, in suburban Columbus, waits of up to 6 hours. Also up to 6 hours in at one polling station near Oberlin, Ohio, up to 3 hours at another. Marvin, North Carolina, a small town, waits up to 5 hours. Clayton County, Georgia, up to 4 hours. Coral Gables, Florida, as Kerry Sanders has been reporting, they may still be there at midnight tonight. Across the country, this has happened, and certainly it's a great sign. People are out there exercising their right to vote. But the bad news is that there have been reports throughout the evening that some people have simply left those lines because they just can't wait that long. Chris?
Okay, thank you, Chip Reed. Let's go right now to Brian Williams with the exit information he's been going through all night. Brian.
Chris, thanks. And 2 points at this hour. Number one, quickly about the photo op on the residence floor of the White House. The White House was concerned earlier that all available videotape of the president, last night's last rally in Texas, this morning in Crawford, later today his arrival at the White House, showed them in a non-upbeat, somber, well, they were all exhausted. They had had made 7 stops yesterday, almost a 20-hour day. So this was obviously, as you mentioned, a way to get him on the videotape record tonight, knowing we would all pump it out the minute we got the videotape and show a kind of new image of the president for tonight's news cycle. Now, as to the exit polling, Pennsylvania. Let's talk about that one, among the biggest battleground states we have to discuss tonight, with the 21 electoral votes that are going to be key to someone's victory. In 2000, Pennsylvania went by a slim margin to Al Gore. Now, of course, it is too early to make a call as we sit here tonight, but our exit polls are telling us what Pennsylvanians were thinking about as they voted throughout this day and tonight. President Bush drawing strong support from several key groups in Pennsylvania. 60% of gun owners going for President Bush, white Protestants, residents of the central and northern parts of the state. Senator Kerry drawing his strongest support from young voters, over 60% there. Union households, also over 60. Black voters, Philadelphia residents, 84% each. Remember those 4 golden counties around metropolitan Philadelphia? That's about 1/5 of the entire vote for the state if you get those 4 counties. Now to the issues. Pennsylvania voters concerned with terrorism or moral values were especially likely to go with the incumbent. 83% of those who said terrorism was the issue that mattered most to them as they went to the polls went for President Bush, as did 81% of those who selected moral values as the issue of primary concern to them. For John Kerry, war in Iraq, health care, jobs, the economy, those were the issues that worked most strongly in his favor. Among Pennsylvania voters who said the war in Iraq was on their mind the most, 75% of those thinking of the war voted for John Kerry today, as did 83% who selected health care, 84% of the people who said the economy and jobs, in that blue-collar vein that runs right through the state of Pennsylvania, that all trended heavily John Kerry. Chris?
Okay, thank you, Brian Williams. Let's go right now to David Schuster with some information on the raw vote, the actual vote coming in from Florida. David.
Well, Chris, when you look at the raw vote numbers, the race is actually even tighter than the numbers on the screen right now, because when you look at more than half of the state of Florida reporting, the counties that have not yet reported include Miami-Dade, none of the precincts have been reported to the state, and Palm Beach. The reason these 2 counties are so significant is because based on Al Gore's results 4 years ago, the Kerry campaign believes that they will pick up somewhere between 160 and 170,000 votes on the margin that President Bush has right now. The bad news for the Kerry campaign is that most of Broward County, their strongest county, those numbers are in. The Kerry campaign cannot expect to pick up much more based on Broward County. The reason the absentee ballots in Miami-Dade have become such an issue tonight is because there are 94,000 absentee ballots. At a certain point tonight, the Bush campaign was told that some of these ballots may not be counted for a while, perhaps on Thursday. 94,000 ballots. The Bush campaign believes that most of these absentee ballots will head their way, at least a majority, and that could be crucial. Chris?
Well, David, help me out here. Let's get to the bottom here. Where does this look based upon what you know about the voting totals last time in the Al Gore George Bush campaign and how close that was? I thought that was about, 500 votes at the end, right?
Well, that's right. And Chris, when you look at the spread between President Bush and John Kerry right now in the raw vote, 200,000 votes or so, the Kerry campaign believes they can make up about 160, 170,000 votes based on the 2 big counties that have not yet reported date, right. Miami-Dade and Palm Beach.
Okay, that sure beats 500 votes. Anyway, thank you, David Schuster. We're going to come right back. We're going to be coming right back at 10 o'clock with some news, as well as our fellow Floridian here, Joe Scarborough. We're going to have big closings coming up here. They're going to be coming up in any second.
This president has made, I regret to say, a colossal error of judgment.
We will fight the terrorists around the world so we do not have to face them here at home.
He misled the American people when he said we'd go to war as a last resort. We did not go as a last resort.
The only thing consistent about my opponent's position is that he's been inconsistent.
Right back now. Unfortunately, once again, we've been stymied a bit. We don't have any dramatic news, if that's what you're looking for. And by the way, the best information on this election has been coming for weeks now. We know which states are going to be close, and they are close. The reporting on this election, because of the very good polling for weeks now, shows where the difficulty is going to be in getting the votes counted tonight because it's so darn close. Let's take a look at Utah. That's no surprise. The president is the projected winner in Utah, a stalwart Republican state. In Iowa, no call. Too close to call. That's a state just like Ohio, just like Pennsylvania, just like Florida. The states we've been watching are so close they cannot be called at this point. You're going to have to be patient tonight to get a result. Nevada, another state on the longer list of battleground states. Nevada, where the Democrats have been hoping to pick up that state, to poach that state. They may have to do it by necessity if they want to get the 270 votes for John Kerry tonight. Montana, too early to call. Don't bet that's a close one. Historically, Montana is a Republican state, a reliably won. No projection there because it's simply too early with the numbers. Again, we reiterate, how's this for bad news for those who want to go to bed tonight? 77% of the vote in. Still too close to call. In Florida, we're waiting to hear, we don't have the Miami vote in there to count with the other parts of that incredibly interesting state of Florida. We're going to have Joe talk about that in a minute. Too close to call in Ohio, as I said. We're reiterating that with about a quarter of the vote in. Kerry struggling with the president there in Ohio, Pennsylvania, Florida, Missouri. Too close to call. That's a surprise, I think. Most people would have thought by now that Missouri, which is culturally conservative and really hasn't been on the list of any of the Democratic advertising buys, they haven't been spending money out in Missouri, yet with almost a fifth of the vote in there, still 19% of the precincts, I have to keep reminding you, not the actual vote, too close to call in Missouri. In Colorado, another state on the long list of battleground states, too close to call. Too close to call in New Mexico, another state which is going to be with us on the battleground list throughout the evening. And too early to call in Pennsylvania with 35% of the precincts in. It's still too early to call there. I'm not sure what that is about. It may be about some of these irregularities, because I hear that Philadelphia is turning in a superlative performance for the Democratic Party and John Kerry tonight. Michigan, another state too early to call. We'll have to figure out why that's the case. Those polls have been closed for a while now. Michigan, too early to call. Minnesota, too early to call. We don't have enough votes there to decide who is the projected winner. Wisconsin, too early to call. Again, not that they're close, it's that it's too early. Not enough numbers in yet. And Arizona, another state where we got our polls closed, but we still don't know enough information to begin to make a projection. Arkansas, where President Bill Clinton, former President Bill Clinton, campaigned for John Kerry, too early to call down there. New Hampshire, with 38% of the precincts in, too early to call. Well, it's a small state, but an important one. Many people have said here earlier tonight, including Ron Reagan, that John Kerry better win that state if he wants to win tonight, for all kinds of reasons. So now we're looking at a map which, despite what seems to be a slowness of reporting the more tricky states to call, is growing in filling out that continental United States. Kerry, 112 electoral votes. President Bush, 176 votes. And by the way, if you're looking at that, we'll reiterate, no surprises yet. These are the states which have been clear in their results. We've been able to project them rather clearly and rather early. The hard part tonight will be projecting the states that have been embattled now for weeks. That's, of course, Nevada, New Mexico, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Florida, all going to be hard to call tonight. You have to bear with us, drink some coffee, have a snack, and stay up late tonight, because these are not going to come in early. Now let's go to the United States Senate races, which are turning out to be a bit easier to call. Iowa, Chuck Grassley, a veteran senator out there, the projected winner according to NBC when all the votes are counted. Chuck Grassley will be reelected. Harry Reid, a man, by the way, watch this fellow. He's the projected winner of Nevada if Tom Daschle loses in South Dakota. He will be the next Democratic leader. He's number 2 right now, the deputy leader. Everybody figures he'll be easily elected should Tom Daschle take a tumble tonight, and that's very much open to a question at this point. Let's go. Robert Bennett, Utah senator, son of the former senator out there, projected winner in the state of Utah. South Dakota, too close to call. There's no surprise here. Tom Daschle, very strong in terms of bringing the pork home to South Dakota, but let's face it, he's a liberal Democrat in a very conservative state. He's up against John Thune, who's a conservative Republican in a conservative Republican state, and that always makes it easier. John Thune, by the way, lost a close one 2 years ago to Tim Johnson, handled it like a man, and scored some points out there for his gentlemanly conduct in taking defeat. Too early to call. United States Senate race in Colorado. There's a very well-known to anybody who drinks beer, Pete Coors. He's the chairman of that company, up against the, I should say, the Latino Attorney General of that state. He's very well known, and he is going to be a very prominent member of the United States Senate simply because he will be one of the few Latinos. Jim Bunning, too close to call. Extremely well known, with 99% of the vote in Kentucky. This incumbent senator has not been able to beat a political unknown just 2 weeks ago, Daniel Mangiardo, who many Republicans were openly mocking just till recently. Let's go to Pennsylvania. What a surprise this is. Joe Hoffman, with very little money, taking on the incredibly powerful incumbent Arlen Specter, who, by the way, this is very important, has enjoyed huge support from organized labor despite his Republican affiliation. He had everything going for him, and yet that race is still too close to call. Another one too close to call, Mel Martinez, the former HUD secretary, battling Betty Castor, with 77% of the precincts reporting. That is a pretty strong report, and yet we can't call that one. North Carolina, Richard Burr, as I said before, 2 very impressive candidates. Erskine Bowles, the former chief of staff to President Clinton, in a very close race, 38% of the precincts reporting there, and still too close to call. This Senate battle tonight is very interesting. So many races too close to call. Here's one too early to call. This is Louisiana, very interesting state, not exactly the typical southern state. They have a rule down there, by the way, which is so much of Louisiana is unique. They have a rule down there that you have to have 50% in order to avoid a runoff. Let's go right now. We have a presidential call in the presidential contest. Let's take a look at what we've got right now. Arkansas, the president has become the projected winner in the Razorback state. You know, it's so interesting that Bill Clinton went down there and campaigned. He thought he could carry it for his friend John Kerry. Unsuccessful. Times change quickly in politics. Let's look at these numbers. 182 votes, electoral votes for President Bush, projected. They're all projected now. And 112 votes for John Kerry. This is very interesting. The president is clearly taking a lead here in the electoral votes. You cannot deny that. But that said, nobody has poached on anybody's territory. Nobody's pulled up a blue state. Republicans want a blue. The Republican president hasn't won a blue state, and the Democratic challenger has not won a red state. Look at these opening gray states. We call them the gray states for good reason. They're gray tonight. Let's look at this. This is fascinating. Look at, I think he's the window washing equipment we got going up and down the wall here, pulling these tapestries up, these drapes that are moving up. There's the vote as you see it, with Kerry behind it, 112, trying to catch up. Interesting to watch that right now. Let's go to something just as dramatic. Keith Oberman, who's got all the governorships as well as the Senate tote board right now. Let's go to Keith right now.
Chris, if you wanted to give it a score, it's 2-1 in the Senate in favor of the Republicans trying to take seats away from the Democrats. And we've talked previously about how important that is in terms of committee chairmanships and other important aspects to it, with the apparent victories, projected victories of Isaacson in Georgia and DeMint in South Carolina, and the Democratic projected taking away of the Illinois seat away from the Republicans by Obama, 2-1. So an improvement by 1, a net improvement by 1 for the Republicans. All right, let's go through the governorships. We have some calls to make. John Huntsman, the incumbent, the man who beat the incumbent governor, Olene Walker, is projected to be the winner in the Republican race for Utah governor over Scott Matheson, son of a former governor himself there. In Montana, an open seat after Judy Martz retired, the Republican Bob Brown and the Democrat Brian Schweitzer. This one is too close to call, with a bunch of zeros on the board to this point. In Missouri, as we keep mentioning, too close to call here again, the Secretary of State, Matt Blunt, the Republican, against the Democratic state auditor who knocked off the incumbent Governor Bob Holden in her primary, Claire McCaskill, 20% of the vote in, less than 20,000 votes separating the two. Delaware, Governor Ruth Ann Minner trying to stave off Judge Bill Lee. She did that in 2000 and is seeking to do it again. But even though 86% of the vote has been counted, it is considered too early to call. Indiana, once again, Joe Kernan and Mitch Daniels, the former OMB director, against the man who took over when the revered governor of Indiana, Frank O'Bannon, passed away more than a year ago. This one too early to call at 67%. In Vermont, also too early to call with 38% in, just 23,000 votes separating the incumbent governor, Republican Jim Douglas, who's been in office since 2002, and the mayor of Burlington, Vermont, Peter Clavell. And continuing in the Northeast in New Hampshire, and this one still too early to call with 41% in and a 3,000 vote difference between incumbent Republican Governor Craig Benson and the Democratic challenger businessman John Lynch. Let's check a few of the congressional seats of import. The Speaker of the House, Dennis Hastert, seeking re-election in District 14. This one a little bit too early to call to this stage, although he has a significant lead over Ruben Zamora in the early counting. And now Tom DeLay, the incumbent House Majority Leader. Since 1984 in District 22 in Texas, NBC News has projected his re-election and, more importantly, perhaps, the impact that he may have on the redistricting in Texas, where 5 incumbent Democrats were rendered vulnerable by the redistricting at Mr. DeLay's insistence in Texas. Before we turn it back to you, Chris, let's run some of the propositions, and particularly the same-sex marriage bans are on the ballot in 11 states. 7 of them have now, according to our NBC News projections, passed. Arkansas, Amendment 3 has passed with a 73-27 majority so far. In Georgia, it's Amendment 1, asking whether the state constitution should be amended. And it would, in fact, be a man and a woman defining as the only people involved in a marriage. This one supported by the Senator Zell Miller, who is going out, and this is passing. In Mississippi, again, the perfect record continues with a huge majority with the early stage in here on Amendment 1 that would define marriage as a constitutional amendment, marriage as a union of a man and a woman. Heavy victory in Mississippi projected by NBC News. It is also Amendment 1 in Ohio, defining marriage as between a man and a woman. Ohio, that's going to pass too by 2/3, it looks like. North Dakota's marriage definition, Amendment 1. No other domestic union will be given the same legal effect in North Dakota. And this one we're projecting it is also going to pass. And just in, perhaps the most significant of the ballot measures tonight, that Amendment 36 in Colorado, which would split the Electoral College vote between the winner and the loser, in all practicality giving the winner, the presidential winner, including the presidential winner tonight, 5 votes in the Electoral College, and giving the loser in the state 4 votes. That one is on its way to defeat, according to our NBC News projection. So none of the controversies, Chris, that we would be expecting if Colorado decided to change the electoral vote rulings there tonight will apparently be dealt with. And we'll go back to you.
Okay, Keith, thank you. Let's go back to a political smart observer we haven't had on yet tonight, Jonathan Alder of Newsweek. Jonathan, it's kind of frustrating because the elections we didn't think would be close have all been decided, and the ones we thought would be close are too close to call.
Absolutely. You know, the president said about 15 minutes ago that he thought this was going to be decided tonight, that he would win tonight. He could be right, but with all due respect to President Bush, he is in the distinct minority. Most analysts who are on the ground in these states on both sides believe this will go into tomorrow at the earliest. It will be, therefore, one of only 5 elections in the last 50 years that have not been decided on Election Day. You know, you have 1948, the last time an incumbent was in a really tough race. 1960 wasn't decided until the next day. 1968 until the next day. 76, and then 2000. So this joins a very small group of elections, Chris, that are not decided on Election Day.
Do you think we'll get results in those states where there's not a lot of litigation, like the Midwestern states?
Yeah, I think we will get a lot of results in the next couple of hours, and it's possible. I shouldn't rule out this getting resolved in the next couple of hours. But if you add up the challenges in Miami-Dade with the absentee ballots counting being delayed, the challenges in Ohio, the long lines you're still seeing in polling places, all of the lawyers on the ground, if you take that all and bundle it together, it suggests delay. It doesn't necessarily mean it's 2,000 all over again, but it's going to be at least into tomorrow by most sensible speculation now.
Okay, thank you. We'll be back to you later, Jonathan Alder. Let's go right now to the two top lawyers we've got working with us tonight who really do know the answer to this question. Let's go to David Boies first, then Ben Ginsburg. David, do you think, I hate to say the two words, Supreme Court, but do you see any litigative situations right now in either Ohio or Philadelphia or elsewhere that might suggest that they might be arriving on the scene? The Supremes.
I don't really. I don't see any litigation that's now on the horizon that would end up in the Supreme Court. Now, of course, I said that in 2000, I was wrong, but even looking at the kind of issues that we have in the courts right now, I don't see any of those getting to the United States Supreme Court.
Do you see this extending, as Jonathan Alder just mentioned, do you think this could extend these situations we have in Philadelphia with the absentee ballots, with the problems in Cuyahoga County and elsewhere in Ohio? Do you think they could hold off us knowing who won those states for more than tomorrow, for example?
If the number of provisional ballots plus the number of absentee ballots are larger than the margin of victory, then it's going to drag on for a few days, because you know that those are not going to be counted until a few days from now. So if the margin of victory is that small, it's going to drag on.
Ben, your view of the same question.
Yeah, I agree with David. I mean, I think that any cases that end up in the Supreme Court are really a function of the margin of victory in specific states. And that really is up to the fickle finger of fate, Chris, that we know really only starts to point in the wee morning hours usually.
Do we have any creative state Supreme Courts that might be knocking down a statutory laws that caused the problem last time? We had a problem in Florida where we had a Supreme Court that said certain rules apply, certain other rules don't apply. Is that a problem we might face again, Ben?
Well, it's always sort of the chance of litigation that you never quite know the answer to. Hopefully, other state Supreme Courts saw what happened in Florida and would learn some lessons from that instance.
Yeah, I think I really ought to take issue with the premise of your question, though, and that was that the Florida Supreme Court did something different last time. The Florida Supreme Court did exactly what they did for 80 years.
We have to do what we do first here tonight. Let's make a call, and here it is right now. Missouri. No longer a contest. According to NBC, George W. Bush, the President of the United States, will carry the state of Missouri. As I said, that was not long on the list of battleground states. The Democrats stopped running advertisement in there several weeks ago. Not a state they still hope to win. That said, let's look at the numbers on the tally right now. We've got 193 right now for the president, 112 for Kerry. It's moving up towards 2-1 again. Look at that map with the gray states on it. Florida, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa. Lots of states to be deciding tonight. NBC has made no projections in any of those states. Here's one of the bright lights in one of the political parties, Barack Obama. They're being congratulated on his projected victory in the Senate race in Illinois. He beat Alan Keyes. Not a big surprise. But certainly this fellow is going to be a figure in the U.S. Senate. When he speaks, for one reason, he knows how to speak. There he is with, I hope it's his wife. Little joke there. There he is with a statement. Here he is with a victory statement. Obama is a fascinating guy. He grew up in Hawaii.
Thank you, Illinois. I don't know about you, but I'm still fired up. I am fired up. Look at this crowd. Thank you, Illinois. Let me begin by thanking all the people who have been involved in this effort. From downstate to upstate, city, suburb, from every community throughout the state. Let me say how grateful I am to all of you for the extraordinary privilege of standing here this evening. Let me thank, because I will forget later on, it's a thankless task, let me thank right now the best political staff that there has been put together in this state. They are wonderful. You know who you are. You guys have been outstanding. I appreciate all of you. Let me thank my pastor, Jeremiah A. Wright Jr., of Trinity United Church of Christ, fellow Trinitarians out there. Let me thank all the elected officials who've stood by me through thick and through thin. But most of all, let me thank my family. I am so grateful to my nephew Avery, my niece Leslie, my mother-in-law Marion, my brother-in-law Craig Robinson, his wonderful girlfriend.
Let's get back to the attorneys. That was Barack Obama, who is going to be, I think by most estimates, a major figure in the United States Senate when he takes his seat in January. Let's go right now to David Boyce, who's the Democratic attorney who fought the good fight in Florida last time. You were saying about the credibility of the Florida Supreme Court, and the fact you were implying they weren't really ideological. They were actually following the books down there when they made their decision.
Right, and even the lawyer that argued against me in the Florida Supreme Court, Barry Richard, has said, both in writing and on television, that he believed the Florida Supreme Court was not acting in a partisan way, that they were simply applying the law that had grown up over 80 years. You can argue whether you like that law or don't like that law, but I think in fairness to the Florida Supreme Court, they were applying the same law that they'd applied for 80 years.
Then you don't believe that the Supreme Court was brought into the election process last time around because of the decision-making of the Florida Supreme Court?
Well, they were brought in because if you take the majority opinion, they viewed the Florida law as violating the Equal Protection Clause. That would be true whether it was a new law or not. And Florida law, I think, was consistent.
Let me go back to Ben tonight. Just both of you. You start, Ben, because we've worked together so much. I want you to start here now. Give us what you think might hold up a clear result tonight. Do the geography.
Well, certainly the question of when you're going to count the absentee ballots in Florida, if it's close enough. The number of provisional ballots in any of the gray states that you mentioned could conceivably hold up a count. There are some administrative questions in some of the states involving particular incidents involving poll watchers or the right to challenge that could cause problems potentially in Florida or Pennsylvania or Ohio.
Okay, let me go right back. Let me go here. David, your thought. What do you think is the problem tonight? We're going to prevent us from getting a clear victory in the presidential race tonight.
I agree with Ben. I think it's simply a question of whether the provisional ballots, the absentee ballots, exceed the margin of victory. I think one of the good things about this election is it went much more smoothly than I think a lot of people predicted.
You were predicting a worst-case scenario for Florida, for example.
Well, I think we still had what I was concerned about, which were the long lines. And I think you particularly had that in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania, and Ohio, as well as in Florida. And I think those long lines are something that we've got to work on correcting for the future. There's no reason why we can't make voting easier and more efficient. But I think that in terms of the concern about widespread fraud or widespread voter intimidation, I don't think either one of those two things materialized.
Do you think that long lines are something that the municipalities and precincts should fix?
Yes,
so we don't have these 4-hour waits?
Absolutely. And that's not a Republican issue or a Democrat issue. That's just a good government issue. That's the kind of thing that both parties ought to unite to correct.
Yeah, I would agree.
We're going to be coming. I want to thank David Boyce for joining us, and you'll be back, Ben Ginsberg, both of you, as the evening progresses. Let me go right now to what's happening right now. We were talking with the two attorneys about provisional ballots. Let's go to our own expert, Dan Abrams. Dan, the legality of these provisional ballots and their relevance if we get a close vote later tonight.
You know, Chris, this is all new stuff. This came as a result of a law in 2002 that was supposed to remedy some of the problems from 2000, saying, look, we want to have this as a backup. So when people show up at the polls and they say, I should be registered, or I was supposed to get my absentee ballot, or I know that I'm allowed to vote, they could say, all right, you know what? Fine, here's a provisional ballot, but it doesn't mean that we're necessarily going to count it. That's also the way they've dealt with some of these extremely long lines. They've said, you know, for example, in one county, fine, fill in these provisional ballots, and then they can decide later if there's a challenge, for example, and someone says those should never have counted. That's why this is going to become so important when it comes to the litigation. In a sense, what they've done is they've delayed the fights, because rather than fight about whether these people are eligible now, they're saying, Take these ballots, vote, we'll deal with the problems later. And that's why it's so important, as Ben Ginsburg and David Boies are pointing out, how many of these provisional ballots come in could determine whether there's going to be a fight. For example, there's a voter in Ohio who's suing, saying, look, we ought to know how you're going to go about counting these provisional ballots. What's going to be the standard for whether you use it or you don't use it? Saying we ought to know that at this point. And of course, remember, there was another ruling in Ohio earlier today, a federal judge saying if you had asked for an absentee ballot, you didn't get it, you came in, you still get a provisional ballot. Chris?
Is this simply kicking the can down the road, giving provisional ballots out?
Absolutely. I mean, look, it's important in the sense that it protects you from having problems you can't remedy. But there's no question that it's just delaying possible fights if it's going to come down to these provisional ballots.
Tom Brokaw was talking to both presidential candidates, including the president, recently, and they seemed to both showed a strong sentiment. They both showed a strong sentiment for fixing our system and finding some way of unifying and uniformizing all the voting in the country for federal elections. Is that constitutional? Can
Sure.
we do that, or do we have to change the Constitution to do that?
No, you wouldn't have to change the Constitution to have a unified system. Now, you might have some problems if there were mandates as to how states had to do things, because generally the way we do these presidential elections is we say it's up to the states. But we could certainly reach an agreement where all the states say, look, here's how we're going to do it. For example, the winner-take-all system in the Electoral College. Sure, there are a couple of states that don't completely do it, but basically all of the states have said we want to play by the same rules. And I don't think there's any reason that they can't come up with a system, a uniform system throughout the country, and they could eventually eliminate the Electoral College.
Well, maybe after tonight things will change. Anyway, thank you very much, Dan Abrams, for that. Let's go to Lisa Myers right now for a report on how the Bush camp is looking at the numbers right now. Lisa.
Hi, Chris. Well, the Bush campaign continues to crunch the numbers, comparing the exit poll data with the actual votes as they are coming in. And what they've concluded, according to a senior campaign official, is that there is a 3 to 4% undercount of Republican votes across the board in the exit poll data. Now, specifically, their analysis is based on the votes in Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina. But they have concluded there is a much broader problem that 3 to 4% of their vote is not getting counted in the exit poll data. They're also feeling increasingly good about Florida. They believe they're doing better than expected in the swing areas. They're doing better than expected in the Democratic areas, and they are seeing very large turnout numbers in the Panhandle, which is a traditionally Republican territory. Now, no one's doing high fives here, but there's a lot more smiles than there were 2 to 3 hours ago. There's still no predictions here about Ohio, but they're feeling much better about Florida and also about the race nationally because of what they see as a significant flaw in the exit polls. Chris.
Okay, thank you very much, Lisa Myers, reporting on the Bush campaign. Let's go to Lester Holt, who's in Ohio, and is going to give us a sense of what's happening there. Lester.
All right, Chris, the situation in Ohio right now is it's going to take some time. Here's why. This is the decision desk behind me, the NBC News decision desk, where they're looking at a number of different scenarios as they look at all the computer models, and they've come up with 2 models right now. One swings toward President Bush, the other swings toward Senator Kerry. 2 different stories. Each campaign can take some optimism and some pessimism there, but all this means right now it could be a very long wait as we wait to see the results in Ohio. 2 models, 2 different stories. Chris?
Thank you very much, Lester Holt. Let me start with Joe. You had thoughts about Florida. What are your thoughts about the numbers down there?
I want to talk about the numbers. With 77% of the vote in, George Bush is 256,000 votes ahead. As David Schuster said earlier, Broward County has already come in for the most part. Republicans have always called Broward County, home of Fort Lauderdale, the killing fields because they always lose by up to 200,000 votes. What that means is they've got to pick up 256,000 votes from George Bush from Palm Beach County, where 2 hurricanes went through, and also Miami-Dade. The Bushes usually do better in Miami-Dade than most Republican candidates. One final thing. Northwest Florida, my home area, that really gave him the election last time, still not being counted yet. those votes are just now starting to come in. They're going to come in 60, 65%.
Joe, look at the number. Look at the board. What do you make of that board right now? 3 million for the president, a couple 100,000 less for John Kerry.
Yeah, so we're 200,000 votes. Broward's already come in. Northwest Florida's being counted. They haven't counted absentee votes in South Florida, which usually trend Republican. And he's outperforming Mel Martinez by about 200,000 votes right now. They wanted Martinez, obviously, to help with the Hispanic vote. I think that's probably worked for George W. Bush. It doesn't work the other way. Broward County, again, known as the killing fields. If George Bush is 200,000 votes ahead without him counting North Florida, and with Broward already in the bank, it's going to be awfully tough for them to carry Florida.
You know what's interesting, Joe? I just got the word that if you look at that number, hold that board up there, 85% voted in your state of Florida. That's how many votes were or total in the presidential last time around. So you're going to get a big turnout. What's that do to the state? These big numbers keep coming in.
Yeah, it really does. And again, it's a lot of it's going to depend on what happens in Northwest Florida, whether they get the vote out the way they wanted to get the vote out. Again, there's still people standing in line in Northwest Florida to vote. Of course, we've got the issues in South Florida also, but the most heavily Democratic county in Palm Beach County, the second most Democratic county, again, hit by 2 hurricanes over the past month or two. Again, as the polls that Keith was talking about before told us, that obviously had a significant impact on people that were voting.
Mayor Brown.
Well, I would tell you this, that I would assume that no one has yet measured the Jewish vote. And I think, frankly, the numbers that Joe has just talked about evidences itself as a result of the Jewish vote going away from Bush, away from Kerry, in greater numbers than anyone ever expected, and not being as solid to Kerry as it was for Bush. And I think that really is the difference.
And Joe Lieber made such a huge difference in 2000 in South Florida, and that may not have been there this time. I'm not saying it's over. I'm just saying right now, if I were in this situation, I would be very nervous because, again, you count on Broward County as a Democrat to carry you over the top, and you don't want them to start count. You don't want to be 200,000 votes down when they start opening up the ballot boxes in North Florida.
Your thoughts, anyone?
No, I think it's absolutely true, and we don't know yet how that vote is breaking, but clearly the president's position on Israel, his strong embrace of Ariel Sharon, has helped him with the Jewish vote around the country, at least anecdotally, and we'll have to see what happens in Florida. This has got to be very encouraging, though, especially to the White House. This may be one of the reasons why they had so much.
Well, you know, I look at these numbers and I see Florida perhaps, I noticed Lisa Myers in her report from the Bush camp that they're more optimistic about Florida. But there's no word there about Pennsylvania, no word about Ohio. Right. We could have a very split result if the president were to carry Florida and were to lose Pennsylvania and lose perhaps Ohio and then go on and debate or divide up the Midwest. You could have something very close to a split decision.
What he has to do at that point then is he's got to win the 7 electoral votes in Iowa. He's got to win the 5 electoral votes in Nevada. He's got to win the 5 electoral votes in New Mexico. And when that happens, at that point, he'll have enough to get over the top. But, you know, it's way too early. Even if Florida drops in the president's category, it's still a long, long way to get there. But Iowa, at this point, with Ohio and Pennsylvania being pushed to the side tonight, Iowa's 7 electoral votes all of a sudden are playing an important role.
Let's all take a look. We've been watching the Jim Bunning race and the problems he's been having out there, winning a victory for re-election to the United States Senate from the state of Kentucky. Of course, I grew up with this guy. He's one of my baseball heroes in Philadelphia. He was a Hall of Famer, and everybody remembers him well. Here he is giving his acceptance speech. He has won re-election.
Opportunity. We know there are people out there who want to destroy our very way of life. We also have to remember that there are many, many more millions and millions of people who want to come to America and do nothing more than build a better future for their families. That is because we remain the beacon of hope and freedom for the world. America is still the land where one can arrive with nothing and work hard and with determination build a better life for themselves.
MSNBC coverage of Decision 2004 brought to you by Bank of America.
We're back at beautiful Democracy Plaza, trying to get the election count as fast as we can get it to you and as accurately as we can get it to you. Let's go right now to show that Jim Bunning, the former pitcher for the Philadelphia Phillies, as I know him so well, did in fact get declared the projected winner. He has not been, actually. I'm looking at that. Isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? His victory speech was given. I was a little confused there because it's the first time I've seen this happen. He gave a victory speech before being projected the winner in that state. We're looking at the numbers that are in. A lot of votes are in, however, but he hasn't gotten the projected victory from this network. He may have gotten it somewhere else, but he clearly took the initiative. Let's go right now to Nora O'Donnell to get some other report. She spoke with the first President Bush tonight. That should have been interesting. Nora, what do you say?
That's right, Chris. I spoke with the 41st president, President George H.W. Bush, just a short time ago, who's arguably very nervous tonight that his son will suffer the same fate that he did, and that is a one-term presidency. The former president telling me, quote, "I'm feeling good now." Emphasis on the now. I think there was a great deal of concern here at the White House earlier with those first wave of exit polls. In fact, the president's top media strategist telling NBC News that they had a near-death experience after looking at some of those initial exit poll numbers, which suggested that the president was doing very poorly compared to Senator Kerry in those three mega states, Ohio, Florida, and Pennsylvania. The president's campaign and his top media strategist now predicting that they will win Ohio and Florida. That's what they say. They say that the exit poll numbers, some of which had been posted on the internet, they said were dead wrong, that the sample size was wrong. They're looking at now at the turnout in parts of Florida, parts of Ohio. They say don't track with what those exit poll numbers are. So there has been somewhat of a reversal of fortune, if you will. And even though publicly they were trying to put a good face on things earlier, some of now admitting that they, in the words of one of those advisors, that they had a near-death experience earlier. And as the former president says, he's feeling good now. And arguably, Chris, you know, when we saw the president invite us up to the White House resident to say that he was feeling upbeat, I don't think the president would have done that if they thought that they were going to lose this election. There has clearly been a change sort of in mood here, if you will, feeling a little bit better from this afternoon. But acknowledging, of course, it's still not over. Not all the votes are counted, and they're still looking at some of those key counties. There's certainly where Kerry can do well in Florida and also in Ohio. Chris?
What about Pennsylvania? Did they mention that?
No. Not specifically Pennsylvania. I think Pennsylvania is still too close to predict that. But remember, all this president needs is holding on to what he won in 2000 and winning Florida and Ohio, and they believe that will be enough for victory. We had spent so much time campaigning up in those upper Midwest states. They think they're doing well in Iowa, but we had spent so much time in Wisconsin, Michigan, Minnesota, because those were the insurance policy, if you will. If they had lost Ohio, we're hearing tonight they feel very good about what they're seeing in some of those counties as the vote keeps on coming in. Chris?
Okay, Nora, we're still counting by our projections here. We're still calling at NBC and MSNBC. We're still calling it too close to call in any number of states, beginning with Florida on through Pennsylvania, on through Ohio, and then we expect to have a lot of more too close to call situations developing and sustaining themselves throughout the evening. So no matter the White House optimism expressed to the former president, these states are very, very close. Too close to call. We're looking at a number of them right now. Look at them all from east to west: Pennsylvania, Ohio, Florida, on through the Great Lakes states, and out west there, even a couple out there, Nevada, New Mexico, Arizona. A lot of close states to call tonight, which will be, of course, decisive in who gets 270 electoral votes. Let's go to, for balance sake, right this moment, let's go to Carl Cantanillo, who's up in Boston with the Kerry campaign. What is the assessment? We just heard Nora say that she just reported that she spoke with President Bush 41, so-called. What are you hearing from the inside there about their hopes?
Well, it's interesting, Chris. I mean, just as optimism has clearly gained some steam as the night's gone on, the early enthusiasm on this end probably dampened somewhat by the numbers they're beginning to show. Actually, on screens here in Copley Square in Boston, they just showed the Florida numbers, and it got very quiet here very quickly, although the posturing does continue. Joe Lockhart just talked to reporters a few minutes ago and continues to insist that they will win Florida, saying that there's limited counting so far in heavily Democratic counties, that they were heavily favored on the early vote in Florida, and they think Ohio, too, will flip for the Democrats as well. So obviously we don't know a lot, but the Kerry campaign continued to insist that those two big states will fall to them. And Pennsylvania, they're very confident about, especially given the action and the heavy turnout in the southeastern part of that state. John Edwards is actually across the street right now. He just came to the Westin Hotel a few minutes ago. He's going to spend some time with his family. Elizabeth Edwards' family is there, said to be in a very good mood, teasing aides today. The reason you have not seen John Kerry is he is still at his residence on Beacon Hill. He took a nap today. He's been working off about 3 hours sleep all day long. Took a brief nap, had a very quiet dinner with his wife Teresa, watching the returns. We're told not making a lot of phone calls, a very subdued evening for Senator Kerry. Eventually, Chris, he's going to make his way here. There'll be some video of that. At that point, we expect to see him upstairs at the Westin Hotel. And Joe Lockhart says tonight, Chris, we do expect Senator Kerry to speak tonight. Chris?
Okay, thank you. Carl Kentney is with the Kerry campaign up in Boston. Let's go right now to Santa Fe, New Mexico, to Josh Mankiewicz, where they unfortunately have another absentee ballot situation developing. Josh, why it's daytime out there. What's going on out there, Josh?
Well, you know, it's going to be a while before we know anything here. The vote is starting to come in. The polls have closed, but all polls leading up to the election showed this race to be within the margin of error. And just about an hour ago, the Secretary of State for New Mexico told us that there are still 191,000 absentee ballots out there. Now, election workers have started counting some of those, to be sure, but what she told us was that it will probably be not just tonight, but probably tomorrow and maybe tomorrow night before all the absentee ballots are counted. Add to that the large number of provisional ballots, which New Mexico is handling for the first time like so many other states, and you have, some time before the final results come in here. And in a state that Al Gore won by only 366 votes 4 years ago, 191,000 votes still uncounted and that may still be not fully counted by tomorrow night, that's a lot of votes, and it could totally sway the way this election goes out here. So we may be in for not just a long night, but a long day tomorrow and maybe another long night tomorrow night. Chris?
Was this foreseen a couple of days ago, or is this just the madcap reality of election night 2004?
Well, yes and no. Everyone predicted a huge turnout, but of course you don't really know whether there's going to be a huge turnout until people actually show up at the polls. Almost 40% of the state's 1.1 million registered voters voted early, so that's a huge number of votes that they could start working on early. But there were incredibly long lines today, particularly in places like Albuquerque, where a huge amount of the Democratic vote is cast, and there were still people in line when the polls closed. Those people were ushered into the polling places and the doors locked behind them, so all those people will eventually vote. But there were definitely more people coming to the polls than election workers maybe had anticipated. And you got to remember, I mean, somebody told me here, somebody on staff here at the elections office told me this. Poll workers, they're generally volunteers. They're in their 60s and 70s in a lot of cases. They work late into the night. They get tired. The count slows down. And I think the Secretary of State's office here, and I think most of New Mexico's 33 counties would be very happy to sacrifice speed for accuracy.
Okay, it's great to talk to you. Josh Mankiewicz reporting from Santa Fe, New Mexico. We're going to be talking more with our panel right now. And the question is, what are we learning? Dee Dee Myers is all of a sudden sitting next to me.
He appears. We're learning that this is going to be a long night, that there are a lot of questions, that there are a lot of uncertainties as we go forward. It seemed like it was breaking one direction earlier in the evening, and that conventional wisdom has clearly dissipated.
What is this spin coming out of the White House that they're going to win Florida, they're going to win Ohio, they may not win Pennsylvania, then the spin coming out of the Kerry campaign, or whatever you want to call it,
this is a reaction
saying the same
to 4 years
exact
ago,
thing.
which is that both campaigns want to be in a position to declare victory if things get tight at the end, because the Gore people really feel they suffered from the final call being that Bush had won and Gore looking like a sore loser throughout that 35-day overtime 4 years ago. So both campaigns are setting it up so that they can plausibly declare victory.
So when the president spoke with his family surrounding him that was to set up we won.
Absolutely, and to replace the pictures earlier, because clearly this morning they can say he was tired, they can say a million things, but the truth was he was looking anxious, he was looking nervous. Kerry looked a lot more confident this morning than the president. They wanted to replace that picture, that image, with the president looking like he feels like he's going to win.
So we're going to see a man with a vanilla barn jacket showing up sometime tonight in Boston.
In the next hour, he'll wave through that crowd.
Red Sox cap, smiling, saying
victory.
The four-leaf clover.
So we can't even count on victory statements anymore. By the way, we just heard from Jim Bunny. I found that fascinating. I misspoke because I looked at that picture, that board as we call it, coming up with the results, thinking, my God, of course he got the check mark because look, he's out there. What did you make of that? You're an old veteran.
That may be one of the reasons why one of his local newspapers suggested in an editorial that he seeks psychiatric help. I sure wouldn't go out there under that case. Let me say this, though, about George W. Bush, though. And we all remember 4 years ago when they took the cameras in there. George Bush ain't a good actor. I mean, 4 years ago when they took the cameras in there and Jeb was in there, looked like they had put a stun gun on him. George Bush is feeling comfortable tonight. He doesn't hide his emotions very well on election night. I'm not saying that as a Republican or a Democrat. I'm saying to somebody that's observed George W. Bush, he does not let you in the inner sanctum unless he feels good, like Nora said, unless he felt very comfortable that he was going to win. Because usually when he does that, like I said, they're back in the hunt. That they found out these tracking polls were off, and they're feeling great about Florida.
Did I suggest a middle case? Remember the old joke about the guy who was hitting himself with a hammer, and somebody said, "Why are you doing that?" And he said, "Because it feels so good when I stop." Could it be that he's just going through a hell of a couple of hours, and then all of a sudden it feels a little better?
I think they thought a couple days ago when the Osama bin Laden tape broke, they were going to win by 3 to 4 points. I think they woke up this morning, they were up by 1 point. They were very nervous about Florida. They were very nervous about Ohio. They're feeling very good right now. They would rather be where they are than where John Kerry is. This beats the hell out of getting a hammer over your head.
They have been nervous since Sunday, Monday. They changed their schedule. Dick Cheney was sent to Hawaii. The First Lady went off separately to go to battleground states. And today, today on the way back from Texas, the president stopped in Ohio. It is not normal.
He stopped in Columbus, and Hamilton County is actually turning out to be stronger for Bush than they expected.
Exactly.
These are the states we're waiting to come in, though. All right? Iowa. Obviously, Florida and Ohio. But Iowa, a Gore state they think they can win. Minnesota, Wisconsin, a state they think they can win. New Mexico, another Gore state they think they're going to win. I mean, right now the numbers are looking...
I'm not so sure they think they can win those states, but they are feeling
what state don't you think they can win?
I'm not so
New
sure
Mexico?
No, I'm not so sure that they think that they can win Wisconsin.
Iowa?
Wisconsin, Iowa, and New Mexico are all in play right now.
I'm saying, and that's all I'm saying. All I'm saying right now is, I don't know why you're shaking your head, because if you look at the map, you've got Florida, Ohio, and then you've got states that Al Gore
Joe,
won
we got
4
it.
years
We got a
ago.
new one. Let's join in. Let's put in some news now. We got a presidential call to make this moment. In the state of Arizona, the projected winner, George W. Bush, the President of the United States, has won in Arizona. Big call there. And we got another one right now to give you, right now, right on the heels of that one. A big one. Pennsylvania, John Kerry is the winner in Pennsylvania. By our projections, that removes, by our projections, when all the votes are counted, a win in Pennsylvania for John Kerry. Very interesting, because that now leaves two of the big three. The deal maker for the president now is probably having to win two. Maybe having to, what do you think, Joe? He has to win two now, the president get reelected?
Well,
does he have to win Florida and Ohio, or just one?
The president needs to win Florida, and then he needs to win a combination of those states that I talked about. He needs to win Iowa, New Mexico, Nevada, some of these other states that are still hanging out there. As Pat Buchanan pointed out several hours ago, because of redistricting, I think about 8 electoral votes went from the Gore column to the Bush column over the past 4 years.
I don't think either of these results are very surprising, though, Arizona or Pennsylvania.
Nothing has been surprising.
Nothing has.
No.
And that's the most
exactly as we expected.
Nobody remembers in this business 3 days ago, Pennsylvania in a lot of polls was leaning toward the president. I read these polls every day. So it wasn't surprising given the last 24 hours. but given a week ago.
Well, but you know, people on the ground were
talking to people on the ground that Pennsylvania.
Because they're going to dump $1 million in street money and turn the thing around.
Never broke a sweat.
And they had so much money in Philly, they poured it into Montgomery County. We know too much here. It's like I say, no, there's been no poaching so far. The interesting point tonight, the president of the blue party is carrying blue states. The challenger of the red party is carrying red states. And the no man's land of these states we've called the battleground are still there. And we're going to come back and we're going to come out and talk about whether or not, and maybe not, the youth vote failed to weather the storm today and get out there and vote. We'll see the good news or the bad news for the Kerry campaign. If it didn't get out there, they're going to have a problem tonight. We'll be right back with a big question. Did the kids vote? Let's go look right now and see where the campaign stands right now. Let's go right to Brian Williams, by the way. He's been looking at the exit polling, and he's figured out something about the youth vote, whether it did or did not show up in the numbers projected. Brian.
Well, Chris, I have the answers to the questions you've all been asking about this. Most of the political pros in the business, this will be the single most interesting set of exit poll figures. With all the hype about the potential of the youth vote, a whole lot of time, energy, money spent targeting young voters in the hope of getting younger people who don't usually vote to the polls this time, making this year different somehow. NBC News exit polls suggest these efforts did not pay off in the end. 18 to 29-year-olds, the fact is, made up 17% of voters nationwide. That is the exact same percentage as 4 years ago. Many thought the war in Iraq would push young voters to the polls. A lot of the pre-election polling, remember, showed them tipping in the anti-war direction. We didn't find any evidence of this today. Among voters ages 18 to 29, 49% said they approved of the decision to go to war. 49% said they disapproved. It's the red versus the blue. As for how the young voters were breaking in the presidential race, they are going for Kerry. In the choice, they are going 56-42 Kerry over Bush. That's a departure from 2000, when the younger voters split pretty much evenly between Bush and Gore. So, Chris, there you have it, a coveted category, a talked about category, and the answers appear clear, at least from exit polling tonight.
Well, there it was. That was a brilliant and brutal debunking of previous opinion by the exit polling information we have.
Notice that even the 31 to 40-year-olds also declined voting.
You know, I know last night I was called the cynic for repeating it over and over again.
No, you were doing it tonight as well.
And I was doing it tonight
as well.
Before these numbers came in, and again, I said it, and I warn all of you that are running for office. I talked to Dee about it. Every 2 years, we always hear the youth are going to go out, they're going to vote, they're going to make the difference. And that's why I said last night, when everybody else on the planet was saying the youth were going to be motivated, that they weren't. It's not that I'm smart, it was just a reality check. Dee will tell you, the youth leave you at the altar every time.
It's that you're smart and cynical.
Okay, let's go to Chris Gansing for more. Let's go to Chris Gansing out in Cleveland. This is a state we're all watching, Ohio. Chris.
Thanks very much. I was just talking to Bob Bennett, the GOP chairman here. He's been watching very closely here. This is an area that the Democrats have targeted. In fact, Cuyahoga County, the Cleveland area, Chris, has its own organization. It's almost like a state organization. It has its own communications director. It has its own staff. That's how seriously they take the Cleveland area among the John Kerry campaign. Here's why. This is a heavily Democratic area. They wanted to get the numbers up, particularly among African Americans, but with half of the precincts reporting now, John Kerry has 60% of the vote. That is below what Al Gore had 4 years ago, and he lost Ohio, as you know, by about 3.6%. One of the key goals of the Democrats this year was to get up those numbers. They needed to keep their margins high so that in the rural areas where George Bush is strong, they could offset those numbers and still win in Ohio. So right now, half the precincts reporting 60% of the vote for John Kerry. The Democrats will tell you they're going to have to bring those numbers up when the other 50% of the vote comes in if they're going to look strong here in the Buckeye State. Chris?
Okay, thank you, Chris Chansing. Let's go right now to Keith Oberman. Also looking at the results. Let's get some more results from Keith on the governorships and the Senate. How it stacks up right now. Keith.
Chris, 11 governorships up for grabs this evening, and we have now 3 each for the Democrats and the Republicans. First to Indiana, where Mitch Daniels, the former OMB director, has unseated Joe Kernan, the incumbent Democrat, who'd taken over for the late Frank O'Bannon upon the latter's passing in 2003. That's the projection by NBC News. Mitch Daniels in what looks like a significantly large margin victory over Indiana in the governor's race. And in Delaware, this one also called as a probable by NBC News. The projection there is that incumbent Ruth Ann Minner, the Democrat, will retain the office that she won by defeating Bill Lee in 2000 and going again against Judge Lee again today and defeating him once more. So 3 each and 5 still pending. Chris, back to you.
Okay, thank you, Keith. Just a quick thought here. I want it from you, not from me. This problem with getting out the vote in Cayuga County, heavily ethnic, black, but also ethnic, Eastern European, all kinds of people out there, is this the Catholic thing kicking in? Why would that vote be down? The blacks are probably voting Democrat. What happened to the whites?
Well, we'll have to wait and see. I mean, one of the things we've been hearing is that African Americans aren't turning out in as large numbers. And remember, there was that ballot initiative banning gay marriage, which is something we've seen splitting off some of the African American votes. So that could have been it. It could be white Catholic voters, ethnic voters. It could be that the second half of the vote will come in stronger and raise Kerry up. We just don't know enough yet, but there's certainly a lot of factors at play in that.
You know, African American voters are so many of them are culturally conservative. So many there's so many stereotypes out there, and you put as Ohio had Amendment 1 on the ballot, and it's about gay marriage. I'm not saying that in and of itself is what moved them, but again, they are so many African Americans are culturally conservative.
That's a very important point, but let's get back to that. We're going to be making some big announcements right now as we go to 11 o'clock. Oregon, Washington, California, Hawaii, and Idaho. Let's get those announcements out in just a couple of seconds. Once again, we're at that spot to make some news.
America shows uncertainty or weakness. In this decade, the world will drift toward tragedy.
Saddam Hussein didn't attack us. Osama bin Laden attacked us. Al-Qaeda attacked us.
First of all, what my opponent wants you to forget is that he voted to authorize the use of force and now says it's the wrong war at the wrong time at the wrong place.
Iraq was not even close to the center of the war on terror before the president invaded.
Okay, here they are, the big calls. Of course, starting with the biggest state, California. We're going to have that result in just a second. Here it is. California, John Kerry is the projected winner for the largest state in the union. There it is with all those 50-some electoral votes. A big win, not unexpected, but a big win for John Kerry. That'll move him up in the in numbers and show the real competition going on here. Washington State, also John Kerry, projected winner by NBC there. So that's 2 wins on the West Coast. This is becoming something of a bi-coastal race. Here, of course, in Idaho, President Bush in conservative Idaho, clearly the winner there in a reliably Republican state. We're looking right now at too early to call Oregon. It has been on the list, a longer list of the battleground states. Oregon, too early to call in that case. We just don't have enough numbers to make a call. Too early to call as well in Hawaii, where the vice president went out there this weekend and talked a lot about the dangers of a second Pearl Harbor. It was a rather dramatic statement out there. Too close to call. Again, Florida, that's going to be haunting us throughout the night, perhaps. Too close to call in Florida. Too close to call in Ohio. The 2 of the other big 3 we've been watching all night. Ohio, too close to call. Colorado, too close to call. Another state that is hard to figure sometimes in presidential campaigns. It's gone from liberal in the 70s to conservative with the focus on the family and the conservative cultural groups moving in there. And then with the Hispanic vote gaining power, too close to call in Colorado. It keeps changing that state. Iowa, too close to call, another key battleground state where the president had been doing very well out there. Nevada, too close to call. one of the states that Bill Clinton, the former president, went out and campaigned in the last week of the campaign. New Mexico, the other Bill Clinton state that he visited, another one that's too close to call. You'll notice these are no longer too early to call. They're getting to be all too close to call. Here's the one, having said that, too early to call in Michigan. Not enough numbers there to even make a projection as to whether it's close or not. It's simply too early to tell in Michigan. In Minnesota, too early to call. That's what it means, too early. We don't know yet. And in Wisconsin, another state, too early to call. Not enough numbers there to give us a sense of who to project. Too early to call in New Hampshire. Again, no indication of whether it's going to be close or not. It's simply too early to call, and it's late. Too early to call in Montana. That's usually a Republican state. I wouldn't go by that as indicative of a close contest. Let's look right now at the Electoral College votes. Whoa, there it is, close now because of California's big 50-plus electoral votes. 199 electoral votes for challenger John Kerry, 207 for the President of the United States, 207 to 199. Nobody's won a state from the other party. Look at that map. Let's hold it up there. See all those reds? They were red last time. See all those blues? They were blue last time. Nothing has changed. Look at the grays. That's where the battleground is. That's where the advertising money has been spent on TV. That's where the candidates have traveled over and over and over again. States like Iowa, as small as they are, 7 electoral votes, in and out of there all the time. The only one of the states I'd have to say that's among the battleground states is Pennsylvania, which was blue last time, heavily contested by the president this time. Blue again this time, but look at those numbers. You can't make it much closer to that. It's 11 o'clock at night, and it's 199 to 207. Let's go to Keith Oberman for more results right now. Keith. Oh, more. We've got more Senate races right now. Barbara Boxer has done it again, her third election to the United States Senate. She just keeps doing it. Barbara Boxer. Bill Jones, a major opponent this time. Patty Murray, another woman in the United States Senate from Washington State. She's won, according to our projections, re-election. Ron Wyden in Oregon, re-elected by our projections. Ron Wyden, Barbara Boxer, Patty Murray, all re-elected by our projections so far. Mike Crapo, who is a Republican from Idaho, again following the pattern of ideology in the West. Senators from the West express the ideology of their constituents there. Danny Inouye, World War II hero, lost his arm in the war, a very popular fellow. He's been reelected once again. What a career he's had, Danny Inouye from Hawaii. South Dakota, too close to call. This is going to be too close to call. Those numbers, 43% of the precincts reporting, are high. There are not that many people that live in South Dakota. Those numbers are going to be fought for one at a time. A real retail state where a huge percentage of that state knows Tom Daschle personally and also are getting to know John Thune. So this is like running for Congress rather than running for the United States Senate. It's a very small state with a very small population. Everybody knows everybody. Too early to call in Colorado. And that's a big name. Obviously, everybody knows Pete Coors by name because of the beer. Let's take a look at Kentucky. You know what? This is interesting. Hold on this one. NBC, I don't know what anybody else is saying, but NBC says this call is too close to make right now. It's too close to say who's won that race, even with 99% of the vote counted. Jim Bunning has not been declared the winner by NBC. He has been declared the winner by Jim Bunning, which is an interesting thing, as Joe has been having a bit of sport with him earlier tonight. We'll see whether there's anything clinical involved there, but I'm not so sure. Let's take a look at Pennsylvania, too close to call. Art Inspector going for his 5th term, Joe Hoffel, an underfunded congressman who many thought was doing this as a run for the next time. He was hoping to maybe run close with Senator Specter and maybe take on Santorum the next time. Clearly making a run of it this time with 2/3 of the precincts in and reporting, look how close this is. And this was not a battle of money. Art Inspector spent a lot more than Joe Hovel, and he had the support of the unions of Pennsylvania, unusual for a Republican in a general election. Boy, there's a lot of surprises tonight. This is amazing. Florida, Mel Martinez, the HUD secretary, the president personally recruited to this campaign with 92% of the precincts in. Look at this race. This country is divided, not just as a whole, it's divided in every portion of the country for any race. It is amazing. When you want to fill an open seat, you got a competitor. Look at this one. Too close to call in North Carolina. The Tar Heel State Erskine Bowles, who was chief of staff to President Clinton and who ran 2 years ago against Elizabeth Dole and got beaten rather handily, almost by 10% last time. And look at him with 2/3 of the precincts reporting. There he is. Look at this. Too close to call. Very interesting races all across the country for the United States Senate. In Louisiana, it takes a 50% victory down there to win without a runoff. Too early to call. We got David Vitter, the Republican, up against Chris John, and he's one of the two Democrats running in that very interesting way they do things down here. Now to my colleague Keith Olbermann for the rest of the results coming up right this moment.
All right, Chris, with all that in the Senate and even with perhaps the Bunning and Specter re-election still up for grabs, with all that has actually happened, there's only been three changes, a net gain of one by the Republicans because DeMint takes the South Carolina Democratic seat away from them and Isaacson in Georgia takes the Democratic seat away from them, whereas Barack Obama wins for the Democrats in Illinois. So it's +1 on the Republicans and -1 on the Democrats. Let's do some of the House for you. In Florida, Representative Katherine Harris, who was big news 4 years ago, as we all remember, is now projected as the winner in District 13, even though she had trouble with her own absentee ballot. She's the winner over the Democrat Jan Schneider. Into the Texas redistricting saga, or as it's also known, the Chainsaw Massacre. One of them, Max Sandlin, a redistricted incumbent, is projected as the loser in District 1 to Louis Gohmert, the former appeals court judge. In District 19, where we had two incumbents fighting each other, Randy Neugebauer, the Republican, is going to, according to our NBC News projection, defeat Charlie Stenholm, the Democrat. That's in District 19 by a handy margin, if that holds up. And in District 32, Pete Sessions and Martin Frost, one of the most publicized congressional races of the year, is going to again go to, it has to go to the incumbent, and in this case it is Mr. Sessions. In District 32, once again, the Texans who were redistricted, the Democrats 0 for 3 so far. In Louisiana, the first Indian American in Congress, Bobby Jindal, is projected as the winner in a huge field of no less than 6 candidates in Louisiana, with 90% of the vote in District 1. And in a District 2 Connecticut vote, which we present to you because the Democrats thought they had a shot at this seat, taking it away from incumbent Rob Simmons, and that was part of the keystone of their hopes of getting the balance of power back, or at least closer in the House. They didn't get it. Rob Simmons projected by NBC News as the winner there. Some gubernatorial races. It's too early to call the bid to replace Governor Gary Locke in Washington with the Democrat Gregoire and the Republican Rossi neck and neck very early on in the counting. In Missouri, it is still, though half the vote is in, still too early to call, with a 23,000 vote difference between State Auditor McCaskill and Secretary of State Blunt. It is too early to call still in Vermont, even though the polls closed 4 hours and 7 minutes ago, where Jim Douglas is seeking to fend off the challenge of the mayor of Burlington, Peter Clavell. And it is still too early to call in New Hampshire, where it is the Republican incumbent Craig Benson hoping to stave off the John Lynch challenge, and Lynch with a marginal lead, even though 60% of the vote in. Way too early to call, which I guess is the mantra. We could all say it together, Chris, in all the races so far. Way too early to call. Back to you.
Way too early, Keith. That's correct in all the races. But where we have seen a decisive victory by the Republican parties in the Lone Star State of Texas, where Tom DeLay, the Republican leader of the House, the majority leader of the House, has done what he wanted to do. What did he do today?
What he did, he redistricted. There's a big battle over it, redistricting Texas. You have 3 incumbents. This never happens. I always joke that the turnover rate in the United States House is less than it used to be in the old Soviet Politburo, except it's not a joke, it's the truth. But tonight we saw 3 veterans, 3 Democratic veterans. Charlie Stenholm, a conservative Democrat who's been there for well over a decade. Martin Frost, who used to run the DCCC, another Democrat, down to defeat. Max Sandlin, another Texas Democrat that's been in the House, I think, for 6-8 years. I think he came in when I did. I mean, Tom DeLay has been successful and has done what hardly anybody is able to do. He has knocked off 3 incumbents.
With incumbents. They lost with incumbents.
With incumbents.
And Charlie Stenholm was actually one of the original boll weevils when Ronald Reagan was putting together his original budget deals. That's how long he's been
Blue Dog.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
And what we're
Very
seeing
important
is
on those budget issues.
Continuing trend of moderates being replaced. I mean, moderates being replaced by ideologues on both sides of the party. So instead of having sort of moderate Democrats, centrist Democrats, we're now going to have conservative Republicans, which is going to just trend toward a more divided Congress.
Another way of putting that less delicately is to say it's the end of the conservative Southern Democrat, because Charlie Stenholm used to lead them in the House.
He did, but let me tell you what, and this is very destructive for democracy. I'm not talking about Tom DeLay or Republicans or Democrats, but you can talk about him. But let me say, this is what's so destructive about democracy right now in America. They have the computer models. They figure out how to gerrymander districts. If you're a Democrat, I'm going to give you all my Democrats. You're going to give me all of your Republicans. I'm going to be able to be as extreme of a Republican as I want. You're going to be as extreme as a Democrat as you want. We are untouchables, virtually untouchable, because of the way the gerrymandering goes. Now, what DeLay did,
and it feeds the partisanship, and it feeds the gridlock.
And that's why the House of Representatives is so dysfunctional, because both sides are doing it. And I'll tell you what, African Americans have been hurt over the past decade, because what they'll do is, what Republicans will do is they'll go to one African American candidate and say, I'll tell you what, we're going to pile all the African Americans, going to make your district look like a snake.
Like North Carolina was the classic case.
Exactly. They do it in Florida. They do it all across the South. We're going to give you your seat for life. You give us this. And so they'll trade 4 Republican seats for their one safe seat. And it's happening. I'm telling you, I'm a conservative, but there needs to be some national commission to look at what's happening in the House of Representatives and the gerrymandering. It's sickening with the computer models, and it's feeding extremism, and it is bad for democracy.
What's the re-election rate right now, Joe?
I would
90%?
I would guess it's 96, 97%. That's why these 3 losses in Texas are so shocking.
But they were beaten by incumbents.
They were beaten by incumbents. Yeah, no, I mean, listen, it is next to impossible as an incumbent to lose there. And I'm sorry.
I just want to get into some big news, because we are looking at these 3 states all night, and I want to be observant of what people out there like me are wanting to know right now is who's going to win this election. Let's go right now to Chip Reed, who's in Cleveland. Chip, what's going on out there with that big turnout?
Well, actually, I'm in the Making Your Vote Count Center here in New York, but I'm going to be talking about Ohio, Chris. Let's take a look at what's happening in Ohio now. 5.8 million people are estimated to have voted this year in Ohio. Some are still standing in line. Now, that's compared to 4.8 million last year in 2000, an absolutely enormous increase. And let me take a look at the 2 counties, get back in here, where they are really having problems now. Franklin County and Knox County. In Knox County, people have been standing in line for 9 hours. In Franklin County, 3 to 4 hours, 5, 6 hours. We've heard a variety of reports. So what happened is the Democratic lawyers went to court and said, this is not fair. There ought to be some alternative way for these people to vote. So the judge said, okay, we'll allow them to vote on a paper ballot or some other alternative way that you can come up with. A lot of people thought the Court of Appeals would say, no, that's just too creative. We're not going to allow it. The Court of Appeals has now affirmed that decision, and they are now expecting in Knox or Franklin, maybe both, they will actually allow people to vote on these creative ballots, whatever the election officials can come up with. Alternative voting, they're calling it. So they're going to extremes in Ohio to make sure that everybody gets to vote. Chris?
Chip, do you know how long it's going to take to count those paper ballots? Do they even have the people trained to do it?
Well, they're just going to improvise as they go, and I don't think anybody's expecting the counting to go real quick. I mean, don't forget, down in Florida, Glenda Hood, the Secretary of State, is saying she thinks it's going to take till Thursday to count their absentee ballots. So there is the possibility there's going to be some counting going on in Ohio and Florida for some time to come.
Okay, thank you, Chip Reed, who's here. He's not out in Cleveland, but he's following Cleveland. Let's go right now to a not unexpected result. That's the Illinois Senate race, and Alan Keyes is giving his concession speech.
I knew when I got into this race that it was going to be a hard slog. There was no doubt about it. But you know what you have to do when you want to build a house and you want to build it strong and tall? The Lord has told us clear that you must find a place where you can lay the foundation in solid rock. Well, in Illinois, we have gathered from every corner of the state the solid rock of people who act on behalf of the common good, who act on behalf of their faith, who act on behalf of an idea that is not corrupted by their own selfish interest. And on that rock, we shall build a house of integrity in politics for the people of Illinois. So let the word go out to all of those who hung back and equivocated, to all of those who lied and did not deliver on their promises in the Republican Party, to all of those who heard the truth and could not bear the ring of it. Let them know that Alan Keyes has said tonight, on behalf of every heart that supported him in this state and around the country, we have just begun to fight.
Until I started coming up.
Alan Keyes, a very smart guy running in what looked to be and has turned out to be a hopeless case. Right. Let me ask you, you're a romantic, Joe. Why did he go in that race?
I'm not that much of a romantic.
Why did he take that risk?
Well, I have absolutely no idea. Maybe he liked the attention. I personally, though, if I were Alan Keyes and had criticized Hillary Clinton for being a Chicago resident running for Senate in New York, I don't think I would have been a Maryland resident jumping over to Illinois. It seemed a bit hypocritical from the very beginning.
It's attention. It was an opportunity for him to have a platform to talk about the issues that he cares about, and
there was something deeply cynical about the whole thing too. Let's find an African American who's well known and parachute him into.
Well, they went through
they tried to find better
every
candidates,
conservative that they could. They just ran out of options.
But Barack Obama automatically becomes one of the few Democratic stars we've seen tonight already, elected to the Senate. And he is clearly, from his keynote address,
you know what I predict? That Fitzgibbons will, the guy who's in there now, what's his name, the incumbent? Peter
Fitzpatrick.
Fitzpatrick is going to give up the seat early so that he'll get some seniority in the United States Senate. That's always a nice thing to do for the home state guy. We'll see that. Anyway, we're going to go break right now and come back with lots more about returns coming in tonight as we watch this battle. But we're looking right now. Let's take a look at this undecided map now and how treacherous it is for both parties. Too close and too early, or both. Let's look at these green states. We have a new color now to look at, green states, and they're going to decide who's the next president. It's that close. It's that exciting. So many close contests tonight, especially the big one for president. The states now that have been called, look at them, and there is a lot of country that has declared itself according to our projections. Look at all that red. Look at the blue up there in the Northeast especially. It's beginning to take shape very much like the 2000 election, of course, for those who paid attention last time and recall this map. But of course we have these other states up there, Oregon and Nevada. They're just working our way eastward. Of course, Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, Ohio, Florida, so many states. Let's take a look, though, to put ourselves in a more positive frame of mind. Let's look at the deciding states right now. Well, here's one too close to call, Florida. Still to decide, still to get the numbers right. Too close to call, Florida, no surprise, really close. Ohio, too close to call, too close to call. Colorado, surprisingly one that's too close to call, but Kerry's challenging there. Another state that's too close to call across the country right now, and it's over 11 o'clock in the East Coast. Iowa, too close to call. These are the battleground states, ladies and gentlemen, we've been looking at for weeks. Nevada, too close to call. New Mexico, another battleground, another state that Bill Clinton visited last week, too close to call. Michigan, too early to call. We don't have the numbers there to even begin to estimate whether it's close or not. Minnesota, same deal, too early to call. Too early to call in Wisconsin. Too early to call in New Hampshire. And too early to call out in Oregon. And too early to call in Hawaii. And there you have it. Look how close it is. 199 to 207. We got a crowd outside here that applauds even close calls. They like it close so far. That's part of the excitement of watching election night, rooting for your candidate, and hoping that if there's a doubt, that he will benefit from it. What did you think? What do you think? You're the pro here.
I've talked to Republicans and Democrats in the last couple of days as we've talked about how divided this country is. And even partisans have said, I just hope we're not in a protracted situation like 4 years ago, that let's have a result. That's clearly what the markets would like to see. The investors would like to see a result. Also, we have a power to project to the world, and the fact that this country could be, if you do have more than 1 million absentee ballots potentially in Florida that won't be counted for a couple of days, Ohio, it looks like, won't be counted, some areas, key areas in Ohio, we could be in a situation where we don't know who is elected. And as Dee Dee pointed out earlier, The one lesson from 4 years ago that the Democrats have learned is they are not going to concede anything. There will not be any grace period because they feel that they really gave up whatever strategic advantage, or I should say tactical advantage, they had 4 years ago. And even though the president has the real estate and the incumbency and, you know, the authority of office, they are really going to drag this out.
What do you think the world's going to, you know, our enemies are going to hear this news report. Yeah. They're going to read Reuters, they're going to read Agence France Presse, they're going to read Al Jazeera, and they're going to see that the United States is caught in a bind. We can't really decide whether to re-elect our president or not. It's that close. Joe?
It's like 5, 6, 7, 8 hours after we started voting. We've got hundreds of millions of people in this country.
But 3 billion people were reading the papers tomorrow morning around the world saying we haven't figured it out yet.
And you know what they're thinking? Thank God, or what I'm thinking is, thank God this is how we decided. It's not like the Sudan, where if tomorrow my guy loses, my family doesn't get shot and drug out. This is no crisis. This is democracy. Right. This is what happened in 1960. I remember in 1968, it was my first memory of politics. I was watching with my dad at 5 in the morning as he was putting on his tie, getting ready to go to work, trying to figure out whether it was Nixon or Humphrey and how it happened. This is the beauty of democracy.
And even 4 years ago, when it was drug out for 5 weeks, there was no violence. And when the new president was finally appointed, or whatever it was, nobody protested. Everybody accepted the result, more or less, and moved on. And the country functioned. And I think
we have a president who is a lightning rod around the world because of the war in Iraq, and the people around the world are watching, rooting, probably in many cases against him, and seizing opportunities. I'm asking a rather drastic question. Mm-hmm. Will enemies see this as an opportunity if this goes on for 3 or 4 days?
For what? No, absolutely
not. This is not the Cold War.
Yeah.
And we don't have enemies.
If you check your Constitution, Al Haig's actually in charge.
It's not like anything stops functioning either. I mean, every aspect of the government is still in place: the military, the Homeland Security Department, the president.
It just 20 million voters. It takes a few days. It takes 2 or 3 days.
It also tells us that we don't have the technology down. It's sort of amazing in this day and age that we haven't figured out better ways to count votes.
I'm going to go right now to our offstage panelists. They're on stage where they are. Let's go to John Fund. Are you out there, John?
No, John isn't here. John left.
Oh, let me go to Ron Silver, because you clearly are, Ron. I raised a question which I think was debunked before I could even finish the sentence, which does this, not stalemate, but this close contest in all these states, which looks like it may go more than a day, and enough of these states to stop a decision from being made, cause a concern in the world.
No, I don't think so. I happen to agree with Joe. This is something we should celebrate. It ended 4 or 5 hours ago. Some polls closed an hour or two ago. Think of it as a very nuanced election. We have early balloting. We have absentee balloting. We've had provisional ballots. And now we find in some counties in Ohio, we're going to have improvised ballots. We're in a litigation situation here in Ohio, if not elsewhere. But I think this speaks well of us, actually.
Pat Buchanan.
Yeah, Chris, look, California is a state that has about, 40 million people, an economy that's as large as 5 or 6 countries. The polls have been closed for an hour, and I don't think people around the world are going to get what is going on in America if it takes us a few hours to figure out how this is all sorted out. You got 110 million or something like that folks voting. So I think I think we ought to be proud of what we're doing. We got nothing here I've seen to apologize for. But, Chris, there's an interesting scenario developing. Assume the president wins Ohio and Florida. If he then loses Nevada and New Hampshire, you got a 269-269 tie. That just assumes the other red and blue states go the way you expect. So Kerry, even if he's a little bit down about Ohio, they have a mild possible insurance policy themselves.
But, Chris, one other thing. It's clear tonight that no man who prevails tonight is going to have a mandate. And whoever does become the president, I hope to God that they recognize they don't have a mandate, that we have a very divided country here, and they rule appropriately.
Well said. We want to come back and talk about that because this is the first re-election situation going back way into history where you had a re-election which was so close that you really couldn't say that the president was being dumped or the president wasn't being reanointed. It was very close. to almost deny the kind of mandate you're talking about, and it does suggest maybe we'll have to have a new kind of coalition perhaps ruling the country. Let's go right now to Mark Potter down in Florida on what's called I-4, that track of highway down there that defines the politics of Florida. Mark Potter, what's happening down there? Who's winning?
Well, as you know, Chris, political analysts have long said that if you want to win Florida, you have to win the I-4 corridor, that stretch of 14 counties in central Florida going from Tampa through Orlando to Daytona Beach. And as it stands right now, we've been looking at the numbers, and it seems that there is a very clear trend here in favor of the Republicans. Not all the votes are in yet, most of them, but not all. But it seems that only 2 counties of the 14 are solidly Democratic. They are Orange, where we find Orlando, and Volusia, home to Daytona Beach. There's a close call in Pinellas County, home to St. Petersburg, but that is the Republicans have that just by a little bit, again, completing that trend. The rest of the counties along the I-4 corridor right now are coming down clearly in favor of President Bush. Both candidates recognize the importance of this area. They visited here many times, and their campaign staffs are clearly watching these election results right now. And by the way, behind me here in Hillsborough County in the Tampa area, they are continuing to count the votes. They're almost done, and right now the trend continues here in the Tampa area with George Bush receiving 53% of the vote and John Kerry in this county 46%. Back to you.
Mark, is this vote for the president, has it been enhanced in any way by the very popular way in which his brother dealt with the recovery from the hurricanes?
There's a lot of feeling that that's the case. Jeb Bush stayed here, as you know, through the convention. He's here now. He was very active. The president visited this area many times. That couldn't hurt.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark Potter down at I-4. Talk about Florida and that. Help us out with the political geography down there.
Well, again, you've got 3 states. You've got North Florida, where I'm from. Some call it the Redneck Riviera. Very conservative culturally. You've got the I-4 corridor, which again, it's the swing region of the area. And then you've got South Florida, which again trends more heavily Democratic. The I-4 corridor, usually as the I-4 corridor goes, so goes the state. Hillsborough County, that Mark was reporting from, very important. Hillsborough County, where you see Tampa right there, that's Hillsborough County. Last election in 2000, George W. Bush only won by, I believe, 10,000 votes there. He's winning much more comfortably this year. He's winning much more comfortably across the entire I-4 corridor. So again, it's certainly a harbinger. That's one of the reasons why, again, I think most Kerry insiders are concerned right now and do not believe they're going to win the state of Florida.
You know, I was wondering why there was so much euphoria in the last several hours, given that fact. Can you think of anything that helps the Democrats more than it would have helped them 4 years ago? Has anything changed in their direction?
Let me tell you this, and again, I'm not cynical. I'm just giving you experience, real life experience, and I've been saying this for some time also. There's a reason why local politicians, state politicians, and national politicians like hurricanes in the state of Florida. It's because you can go and roll your sleeves up. You can help people get their power turned back on. You can help people get their air conditioning turned back on. You can help them with basic needs. One of the most impressive figures in the Clinton administration was a guy named James Lee Witt, who saw our region through 3 hurricanes. Bill Clinton was smart enough to understand that he wasn't going to make the same mistake that George Bush Sr. made in 1992 during Andrew, and he appointed Judge Witt, who was absolutely extraordinary. I loved the guy. I hugged him,
was he out of FEMA?
Out of FEMA, yeah. He's the FEMA director. And so again, you have 4 hurricanes, and again, there is nothing. Ron, you were there. My God, it was like a war zone. Yeah. And when the government, and they're so
it's in your neighborhood,
in my neighborhood, and they have been so extraordinarily efficient. I'm not just saying the Bush administration. I'm saying the Bush administration, Jeb.
First of all, Jeb Bush has more than 80% popularity, and George Bush came delivering goodies, delivering federal aid plus the fact that people in Florida were not able to and wouldn't want to focus on the political campaign, on what a challenger needs is attention, because they were dealing with putting their lives back.
And one step further back is, why did Democrats think they could win Florida? There's a couple of reasons. One was the residual anger from 4 years ago, which they thought would drive up turnout, particularly among minorities and traditional Democrats. And the second was they thought they saw an increase in non-Cuban Hispanics, particularly along the I-4 corridor, that they thought were going to trend more Democratic, and that would be enough to get them over the hump.
The big problem, though, for them is real quickly, though, just wanted to say one of the biggest problems for the Democrats has been Jeb Bush's popularity this year. In 2000, he was loathed. He was loathed because of affirmative action. He was loathed because of one Florida by African Americans. That's totally changed now.
What about the Jewish vote? What does the war in Iraq and terrorism do to the Jewish vote in Florida that the Democrats count on?
It's made a huge difference. I mean, you know, during this war, obviously, when I first came on MSNBC, I was obviously very supportive of the war in Iraq. I thought it was the right thing to do. All of a sudden, I would find my commentaries over Jewish World Review and all of these pro-Israel sites that I'd never even heard of before. And I've got to believe that, again, in South Florida, in Broward County, in Palm Beach County, in Miami-Dade, you know, George Bush did not win the Jewish vote, but he certainly cut into the Jewish vote down there.
Actually, more the president's position on the Israeli-Palestinian issue is more profoundly influential in that community.
Well, you're right. I mean, he certainly is. But I'm talking the entire approach toward the Middle East, which is we're going to call the good guys the good guys, the bad guys the bad guys.
But I'll tell you, if George Bush wins Florida, then Ohio becomes absolutely critically important. I mean, Kerry can do it. Kerry can do it without Ohio, but he's got to then win the trifecta of those upper Midwest
You know what's interesting? We've been suggesting, I think it's always implicit when you have a political discussion that a bigger turnout helps the Democrats. And yet in Florida, we're seeing a vastly higher vote than we saw 4 years ago, and yet the pattern holds.
We're seeing those excruciatingly long lines, not just in big Democratic urban areas, but in small communities in North Florida.
See, we're looking at this. That's 800,000 votes already, more than were cast last time. And we're not done yet.
There are only 94,000 absentee ballots there, which is no way going to make up for that 321,000.
94,000 were in one county. There are more
in one county?
There's a million absentees out, right? A million.
There's more than a million.
We're beginning to act like the decision room here. It sounds like we're the decision room. We got to be careful here. Let's go to David Schuster. David, let's pick up on this.
Well, Chris, one of the reasons that the Democrats in Florida are so grim right now is because we've just looked at the precincts that are still left. For example, here in Miami-Dade, which Al Gore carried this part of Florida by about 40,000 votes. The precincts that are left in Miami-Dade, John Kerry may be able to close the gap a little bit by a few thousand votes, but there are also some Republican precincts. So he squeezed about as much out of Miami-Dade, Florida as he can. The greatest Democratic stronghold in South Florida is Broward. Most of those precincts are now in. Again, Kerry may pick up a few more thousand there with what is left in Broward. And then you look at Palm Beach, there's still more precincts that Kerry can squeeze a few more thousand, but it's just not enough when you look at the precincts, the votes, what is left, and Democrats starting to acknowledge that unless something really strange happens, they're not quite sure how Kerry can piece this together and close the raw vote total that you're seeing there of more than 300,000 votes.
Well, it's interesting, David, because the professionals working at NBC, and I think on the other networks, although I haven't checked with them, are still hesitant to call that for Florida. What do you think that's about? I mean, you know, I've looked at numbers throughout the day like everyone has, and I guess it's just close. Despite what we're saying right now, there must be some Democratic pockets that haven't come in yet that justify this hesitance to call that state. The absentee ballots, for example.
Well, Chris, there are some pockets. There are the absentee ballots. There were so many that were cast ahead of time. One of the problems that I think a lot of people are having is that the reporting in Florida is all over the map in the sense that the Secretary of State, the numbers that she is putting out, those are far behind what the Associated Press is reporting. So, for example, if you go to the Secretary of State's website, there are no votes that are included from Miami-Dade or Broward or Palm Beach, and those are the three Democratic strongholds. When you look at the numbers that we're relying on, the Associated Press, those are being reported precinct by precinct. And when you look at, for example, the county websites, we just checked Miami-Dade, the precincts that are left are just not enough to give Kerry much of a boost in South Florida's Miami-Dade. So part of the problem may be that it's just confusing as far as people trying to keep track of what votes are still out there. You get one answer from the Secretary of State, you get an entirely different answer from each of the counties, and that confusion may be contributing to why people are being so cautious.
Okay, so when we come back, we're going to do what the CIA calls pulse the system. We're going to pulse the system through Florida, up to Ohio, up through the Midwestern states, and see if we can figure out which way this thing's heading right now, because it's clearly not exactly within reach for either candidate for president. We're looking at the numbers right now. Nobody has anywhere near 270. And look at all those Christmas trees out there that nobody has possession of yet and would love to grab before the night's over. We'll be back and try to figure out what's happening in Florida and those other too close to call states. We're back at Democracy Plaza counting the votes with everyone else in the country. Let's go right now to Keith Oberman, my colleague in the count. Keith.
All right, Chris, the Senate balance has not significantly changed tonight, but we've had the swapping of 2 Democratic seats for 1 Republican seat as the changes occurred in Illinois, where the outgoing senator has been replaced by Barack Obama, who defeats Alan Keyes by a significant margin. The projection is in already in Illinois. Barack Obama thus making Alan Keyes and former MSNBC hosts 0 for 1 on the senatorial votes for tonight. But as we said, that is the only Democratic pickup of a Republican seat thus far, and there are 2 that have gone the other way. In Georgia, Representative Johnny Isakson has beaten Denise Majette to get to what was Zell Miller's Democratic, theoretically Democratic stronghold. And the other victory for the Republicans, grabbing a formerly Democratic seat, the one belonging to Fritz Hollings, who is retiring, goes to the Congressman Jim DeMint, who will beat Inez Tenenbaum, according to NBC News projections. Let's give you some of the key House of Representatives right now. There was a virtual toss-up believed to be existing in District 4 in Connecticut, where the veteran Republican Chris Shays was challenged by a select woman from Westport, Connecticut, Diane Farrell. And our projection there is that Representative Shays has withheld that position against the challenge. In District 8 in Indiana, this is relevant because John Hostetler has staved off John Jennings, who, among other things, was raised for him by Larry Bird, the former Boston Celtics star and Indiana Pacers executive. In Vermont, in the gubernatorial races that are still in play, we've now called Jim Douglas, the incumbent, in a what looks like a significant victory on the way over the mayor of Burlington, Peter Clavelle. 50% rule. Looks like he's going to clear it. Missouri, though, is still too close to call, with 55% of the vote in against the woman who knocked off the incumbent, Governor Bob Holden, State Auditor Claire McCaskill, against Secretary of State Matt Blunt. Too close to call. Too close to call in Montana, where Secretary of State Bob Brown and Brian Schweitzer, who ran for the Senate in 2000, are locked up in a too close to call race for the governor's race there. And continuing our run through of the 11 gubernatorial spots open, the incumbent Craig Benson in New Hampshire is leading or trailing slightly John Lynch, but that one is still too early to call. And one more with Gary Locke, the Democrat, leaving in Washington. It is again just an extraordinarily close race early on between the Democratic candidate Gregoire, the state attorney general, and former state senator Dino Rossi. So that's some of the other races. Chris, back to you in Democracy Plaza.
Let's go, but thank you, Keith. Let's go to Nora O'Donnell with the White House. Nora, what's the latest on these Florida calls from the White House perspective and also Ohio?
Well, they're feeling very good. Karl Rove, of course, the president's top political strategist, peeking his head into the White House briefing room and flashing a V for victory. They are trying to project confidence here at the White House. Karl Rove has been briefing all of the top members of the staff, the strategist, as well as the president, giving him very frequent updates about the status of the race. It is noteworthy, sort of this emotional roller coaster that has gone on here at the White House and certainly at the president's campaign. One top advisor to the president saying they had a near-death experience this afternoon when they looked at some of those exit poll numbers, which suggested a very strong lead for Senator Kerry. They now say that those exit poll numbers were dead wrong. That, according to the Bush-Cheney campaign. But they're looking at Florida, which they feel very, very good in. Of course, Kerry has captured Pennsylvania. Now Ohio, it's down to that. And their internal numbers, what they're showing is that they are outperforming performing in the counties that they wanted to. And this is so important, Chris, as we dissect sort of this race about how each of these campaigns waged this race. Very noteworthy that Karl Rove went into this campaign with a very untraditional, unprecedented way of waging this campaign. Their goal was to go to areas, Republican areas, that they had won in 2000, but that they underperformed, where perhaps they didn't get as many people turning out to the polls as they thought. They looked at those areas and they said, we do well there. Those people like us, but they just don't turn out to the polls. That's where the president spent a majority of his time hitting over and over and over again on the campaign trail. That's where they wanted to increase their yield. That's the Rovian strategy that they've been trying to execute. They say tonight that's why they're doing well, and again, still feeling confident about Florida and Ohio, but clearly I think it's all going to come down to Ohio in the final calculus. They recognize that. And then just finally, of course, I did run into 41, former President Bush, who also sort of reflected this change of mood here at the White House, who said to me, I'm feeling good now. Chris?
Right. Thank you, Norah. Donald, let me ask everybody here. I want to start with Joe, because you've got the background to know this, and maybe we'll go elsewhere to Pat Buchanan next. Where are the blue states? Norah gave a good description of how they're going to hold what they had. But you know, the president spent a lot of time the last 4 years going to Pennsylvania, more than 40 trips up there. He spent a lot of time going to Wisconsin. I'm not sure the Rove strategy is quite so brilliant when you come down to the states they're trying to pick up as it has been in holding what they had the last time.
Karl Rove's interested in doing one thing, making sure that Bush 43 doesn't follow Bush 41's pathway, and I think he understood that we did have a divided country. I mean, they weren't going to win Illinois. They weren't going to win
Sure, but what are the targets of opportunity for the president to pick up another state besides the red states last time?
Well, we still have them out. Minnesota, Wisconsin, New Mexico, Iowa. I mean, all the states we're talking about. Nevada. I mean,
he won that 4 years ago.
Oh, yeah. Nevada's. But again, exactly what we've been talking about. I think what the Democrats, if the Democrats end up losing tonight, and it is so early, but let's just say the White House is right now. Karl Rove has a reason to flash the V sign. What they've got to figure out what to do is how to get to that candidate like Bill Clinton that can win in Arkansas, that can win in Missouri, that can win going up the Mississippi River. And I just don't know at this point whether John Kerry was that candidate that could take it from Louisiana all the way up to Minnesota, up the Mississippi. Bill Clinton split the country in half, and he did something else. He excited after the African-American base. We'll have to wait and see if...
Well, you've also touched on a nerve, which is the Democrats only seem to win the presidency when they run a Southerner.
Right.
And that isn't complicated. It's very hard for someone with a northern accent, a northern background, unless they have that sort of fighting GI spirit that Jack Kennedy had. He was very moderate on civil rights when he ran for president. At the time, people forget that. And was so acceptable as a veteran, actually, back then in the Cold War. Name a Democrat from the North who could do any better than John Kerry has done tonight.
Well, nobody got into the primary campaign, so I mean, I don't think there is an obvious
Would Joe Biden have done better down south if he'd run?
I don't think so.
It's not clearly speculation. Somebody's got to have a southern piece to them. Something Southern.
And
Joe Biden's clearly not that person. I mean, he's not Southern.
Well, there's kicking up.
But you know what's interesting? The Republicans figured something out in this election cycle. They started it in 2002, and they've done a great job of it here, which is their ground game is all of a sudden on a par. Democrats can no longer take for granted that they're going to outperform Republicans on the ground on Election Day. And what Karl Rove has done is said, we don't have to win any more states. We're just going to drive up turnout in the states that we won 4 years ago. And they, as long ago as a year ago, they already said, we're going to have a precinct captain in every single targeted precinct, and by 6 or 8 months ago, they were there.
And the difference this time was that the Democrats were not relying only on the traditional union grassroots folks. They were relying on these new groups, the 527s, who had just absolutely spread their people all throughout
And there was
Ohio,
a lot of energy,
Michigan.
but no coordination in typical Democratic
And
fashion.
of course, the advantage of the incumbency is that the White House is able to coordinate.
We have a country that if we're in Africa, for example, it would look like a tribally divided country, where there's a contiguous mass of voters to vote for one side, predictably, and a contiguous mass of voters on the other side who vote the other way. Give me a southern state that Kerry has a chance to carry tonight. Name one.
None.
And then maybe a northern state.
Okay, but that doesn't have to do with Republican and Democrat.
What is it?
Well, it has to do with John Kerry versus Bill Clinton. It has the difference between, I mean, you've got to get somebody that understands the culture of the Southeast or the culture of the Midwest. Yeah, exactly. And again, this isn't, this is not saying that a Democrat cannot win in the Southeast any more than it's
Did
not
a northern
saying
Democrat win in the South?
It depends on who that northern Democrat. I don't know. But I'll tell you what. Even though I'm a Red Sox fan, I wouldn't be having him wear. If I were his political director, I wouldn't be having him wearing.
But try to imagine. I'll give you a couple minutes because everybody should do this. Think of a northern Democrat who could do well in the red states. It's hard to
You could come up with a Midwestern Democrat.
I think we should all think of it. We're going to go to commercial and come back and think of some names because I think this is a redundant fact of American life that we're divided north and south like we were in the Civil War. We'll be back to talk about a not surprising map that we're looking at again tonight, north and south divided. Back in a moment from Democracy Plaza. Let's see where we're going in the campaign and the election night right now. Let's go to Keith Olbermann.
And Chris, we'll look first at the House of Representatives. The Democrats had a slim and perhaps a not too realistic chance of trying to get back in control in the continuing race for the balance of power at the beginning of the night, with all seats obviously eligible for election, 227 to 205. A 22-point Republican margin. So the hope was that the Dems would get, for the Dems' hope anyway, would they get 12 or 13 seats and regain control of the House. This does not look likely now after 5 swings or 5 toss-ups to the Republicans. And now we have 2 for the Democrats, eating slightly into that total, but nothing extraordinary. Let's give you the 2. The one in Georgia, first off, out of District 12, where John Barrow has taken the seats for the Democrats away from the incumbent Republican Max Burns. Barrow, the Athens-Clarke County Commissioner, gaining a victory for the Democrats in Georgia. And in Illinois, Melissa Bean, local businesswoman, is projected as the winner against the incumbent Republican Philip Crane, who has represented District 8 in the Illinois in the House of Representatives since 1969. He first entered Congress to replace Donald Rumsfeld, but now he is going out in a most unexpected outcome in Illinois. Quick look at the House. Chris, back to you.
Crane, Phil Crane, his brother lost the seat because of an embarrassment several years ago. Why did Phil Crane lose?
Well, Denny Hastert said that he was going to lose, just like he said Tom Coburn was going to lose. It's not really good when you got the Speaker of the House saying that you don't spend enough time in your district. That's what Denny Hastert said. I guess the voters just wanted somebody younger. Obviously, Phil Crane, 1980, I believe he was he ran for president. Yeah, 1980, and was always looked up to by a lot of young conservatives. And so, yeah, it's shocking tonight that he lost. But again, I think when you have the Speaker of the House and your own party saying that you don't spend enough time in your district, you may not want to put that on your brochure.
Remember that great line, what you do for me lately?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, let's go right now to the other panelists. They're not far from here. Let's go to Pat Buchanan and to Ron Silver. I want to talk to Ron. Well, let's talk to Pat because you're a man of the South in many ways. You always wave that flag whenever you're stirred to it. What is it about our country that allows the old geography to keep coming back and mattering so much? We're seeing it tonight.
One thing is, Chris, the Democratic Party's nominating process winnows out the kinds of candidates who could do well in the South. You go through the Democratic primaries, and you've got to be for partial birth abortion. You got to be for Supreme Court justices who uphold Roe v. Wade. You got to be for controlling everybody's guns. You got to be sympathetic to civil unions and gay marriage. So you take all these stands to get the nomination. Then you got the nomination, and folks like Karl Rove beat you to death with it, not only in every southern state, but in border states like Missouri and Kentucky and West Virginia and states like that. That's what happens. But Chris, in the last analysis tonight, John Kerry has not lost this race at all yet. In my judgment, we've got a ways to go here. The president's got to win Ohio, and I think some of these other states, if Kerry picks up 2 small states, you are virtually in a dead heat. So I think the president's running a lot stronger than these exit polls, and I think there's been too much hype of this youth vote. But this thing is not over by a long, long shot.
What struck me, Pat, we're going to go right now to Carl Kennedy, but before we do, what struck me is how easily the president picked up West Virginia and Missouri. And if you don't contest those states so that it takes a couple hours at least to decide who's going to win them, you got big problems because it's not just you're not just losing the Confederacy, you're losing the border states. What's left? Then you have to run the table, as you've said and others have said, across the North through the Midwest. Let's go right now to Carl Kennedy because I think he's going to reflect our thinking about the difficulty facing John Kerry at this moment. What's the mood up there in Boston, Carl?
Well, Chris, I mean, as we've pointed out in the past hour or so, it's relatively quiet for a rally that was supposed to really get going at this point in the evening. John Edwards has been across the street at the Western Hotel for the better part of an hour. John Kerry is still at his apartment, and there's little to no indication that he's going to be leaving there for Copley Square anytime soon. We've posed this question to the campaign. We've said, look, you've got the White House flashing victory signs, Karl Rove claiming huge enthusiasm over there. What about the Kerry camp? And their response is simply that they've been on TV today. John Kerry did speak after voting at the State House here in Boston earlier. They say that's not traditionally done, and they say they continue to feel good about Ohio, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Iowa, and in the words of one aide, and Florida remains very close. So the rhetoric continues. They do have Mike McCurry out talking to reporters. Joe Lockhart's been on the air, obviously, but from a strictly visual standpoint, the fact that we're not seeing John Kerry so far tonight is telling in the minds of some Democrats, Chris.
Is there a sense, Carl, that John Edwards has not played his part in bringing along some of these border states, some of these more conservative cultural states?
We haven't heard that, to be honest. I mean, I think the general impression of what Edwards has done is that he's actually worked a fair amount. I mean, he's done a lot of second-tier venues that you don't hear a lot about. Same thing with Elizabeth Edwards. I'm not sure that there was ever the calculation that he really could deliver some of those states for Kerry. The fact that the South fell, you might say, quote unquote, so early tonight really didn't strike too many in the Kerry camp by surprise. They're still counting on those key upper Midwestern states to help them over that hump tonight.
Okay, Carl Kennedy, thank you. We'll be back to you again and again tonight. Let's go right now to a call we have to make in the state, the Keystone State of Pennsylvania. There it is, Arlen Specter, a professional, if there ever was one, with union, big labor support, has been declared the re-elected veteran senator of Pennsylvania. Joe Hoffel fighting a very heroic campaign. They're staying in the run. 80% of the vote in. He's got 44%. Very impressive fight by Joe Hoffel, but not successful. Arlen Specter, as always, certainly in the last quarter century, has won again. Let me go right now to Lester Holt, who's going to give us a sense, hopefully, of why it's taking so long in some of these states. Lester.
Well, let's talk about Florida, for example, the presidential contest. We may not get a call. Our decision desk says they may not make a call on that tonight. The reason, absentee ballots. You've seen a lot of the vote in Florida, but a lot of absentee ballots still uncounted. And the sense is a lot of those may be coming from heavily Democratic areas. Thus, we're not prepared to make a call at the decision desk at this time. Ohio, we had talked about that a bit earlier. That was a situation where our decision desk was looking at two distinct models, one that favored a George Bush victory, the other that favored a Senator Kerry victory right now. That's another race that we continue to watch, Ohio. We've also been taking a look in the Kentucky Senate race. Jim Bunning, the Republican incumbent, slightly there, but very, very close. 99% of the vote in. That's another call that we continue to wait because it is so close. That's what we got right now, Chris.
Okay, what do you think, sitting there, Lester, about this the evening as we're progressing it? Some of the people are making bedtime plans right now. Do you think they should get ready to go to bed and get up at 4 in the morning, or stick with this thing? I'm asking about it. Have you got any word about Wisconsin, for example, those kinds of states?
No, I don't have that information right now. But as far as Florida and Ohio has been a difficult one all night, and I don't think there's any surprise here, Chris. I think a lot of us thought we would be right in this position right now, watching Ohio very carefully. People still voting there right now. And then to be faced with two models that tell opposite stories, it's going to be a long night. This may be one where you'd have to wake up in the morning and see what happened.
Okay, Lester Holt, thank you very much. That's an interesting report because it explains the delay, and I like to see that, especially there's two models. Does somebody want to explain that a little bit? Two theories of the numbers and what they mean? I guess that's what it is.
Well, and they've got two computer models, and they're estimating votes. They don't have all the raw vote in, and what they're doing is estimating what the final vote will be based on exit polls, and there's clearly a disagreement among the experts about how to frame those models, how many women will be voting versus how many men, how many young people versus how many old. You know, Pat Buchanan made a really good point, that John Kerry, depending on what happens in Ohio, number one, but depending on what happens in Wisconsin and Minnesota and Iowa, still is in this game. This is a close race still being tightly fought. And right now, George Bush has defended successfully his red states. We have to see whether or not Kerry can still poach one of those red states and turn it blue.
The Republicans only had to hold serve here, and they wouldn't win by, you know, just a few, or what was it, 3 electoral votes last time. Because of demographic shifts, they would actually pick up. Kerry has to win a red state. He has to win a red state, and the question here is who's going to poach a state from the other guy?
And he might have to win more than one, depending, because he needs to pick up a net of loss in demographics.
Nevada won't do it alone.
Exactly.
If he loses Ohio.
If he loses Ohio, exactly.
So he has to win New Hampshire. He has to hold Pennsylvania, which he's done. Doesn't he have to pick up Ohio, to be blunt about it?
Yes.
Well,
in reality, he does. Theoretically, he could win Nevada and Iowa. And Wisconsin and everything else, basically run the board and come up with.
Hold that thought, Didi. We've got a presidential call.
Well, then we got the tie
in this program. Let's go right now to a new call in Pennsylvania. Oregon. Kerry, the projected winner in the state of Oregon. One of the outside battleground states in the long list of battleground states. Oregon, he's won a state that Al Gore won last time. Another blue state. There it is, filling it in out there. Balancing out the numbers. It's certainly turned on the crowd behind us. Look at this, Kyle. Look at this. This is one of the historic campaigns for president. This is going to be going down in the history books as a close one so far. You know, I want to start with Ron. Ron Silver's been all over the place, especially at the Republican convention. You got to speak there, Ron. It was a hell of a speech, by the way, for a newcomer to this political business. A very impressive speech. Why do you think? Now, I know this is tough because you've supported the president. Most re-election campaigns, either the guy says, I can't win it, I'm not running, like Harry Truman or Lyndon Johnson. They try to run for re-election, they get their keister handed to them like Jimmy Carter or George Bush Sr., or they win triumphant re-election. This one seems to be outside any of those lists.
Yeah, because I think it's unprecedented what happened to us on 9/11, and all the punditry and all the historical precedents are kind of out the window. When you look at some of these polls, he rates on the war on terror 85 to 15, on moral values 85 to 15, but in Iraq the numbers are flipped. So I think it's kind of unprecedented, the situation we're in. Also, the polarization of the electorate, I think you have, particularly with these exit polls, is a lot of people lying to people. You can be in a certain profession, and you can be of a certain ethnicity, and you can be in a certain family, when it's much easier to vote for George Bush and walk out of the booth and tell your children, your friends, your family, and your colleagues that you voted for Kerry. So I think these numbers are very suspect. In terms of the Jewish vote, I think you'll see 19% go to at least an admitted 25 to 30%, which will make a difference, particularly in Florida. Apropos of your southern remark before, I think John Kerry made a tremendous mistake when he laid out a strategy for winning this election without winning one southern state. He more or less wrote them off, and he told the country how I can win it without you. Also, Jack Kennedy, when he dealt with the South, it was a different Democratic Party down South, not simply a different personality. So I think for a variety of reasons, this election is kind of sui generis.
Chris, can I say a word about Karl Rove and his defense?
Sure.
What Karl Rove did and what the president did, it doesn't look like they're going to win Minnesota, Wisconsin, Iowa, but what they did is they put those blue states in play. They imperiled them so that Kerry had to go back and defend his imperiled terrain, leaving the president's red state base basically unchallenged except for Ohio and Florida. So even if he doesn't win those states, if he wins this election, he has forced Edwards and Kerry to defend their blue state base, and it was a successful strategy.
I'm just talking about a couple states, Pat. This is history, not conjecture.
Right.
The Karl Rove had the president take more than 40 visits to Pennsylvania.
Listen,
he picked Tom Ridge as his Homeland Security Secretary. He picked Tommy Thompson from Wisconsin. as his HHS secretary and made many trips up there. In those particular salients, they were like Robert E. Lee. They didn't work, right?
Well,
we'll have to see about Wisconsin.
It appears that Pennsylvania, really, it appears the president should have spent more time in Michigan from the numbers, Chris, where they didn't spend much time than in Pennsylvania. It might be that Pennsylvania was like Al Gore's Ohio for George Bush, you know, where he put in, but Michigan is more like it, where the president didn't put in the time, and if he had, he could have picked up those votes and forgotten the 44 trips to Pennsylvania.
Pat, let me ask you a question about traditional voting patterns. The history of you and my memory goes back, but we can't remember when it wasn't a truism that the bigger the vote, the better the Democratic chances. Look at Florida, 1 million more votes cast today than the last time, and yet the results look so far more pronouncedly Republican.
Right. Well, Chris, let me talk to that. I was astonished that we have our reporters and things. They're down in Broward County and Palm Beach County and Dade County, and they're looking at all these lines, and you hear it's 4 hours of wait. Look, that's where the Democratic vote is, and I think we should have had some of those cameras, over there in the Panhandle, in Central Florida, over on the West Coast, where a lot of those retirees are Catholic folks over there, and so I think there's been an awful lot of emphasis on youth vote and things that are naturally going to go Democratic. And the exit polls, Chris, from what we found today, I mean, there was a demoralization. You saw it on the president's face and everything. Somebody's got to figure out what was wrong with these exit polls that looked like, John Kerry was going to have a sweep tonight.
Yeah, well, I still am prohibited from talking about those exit polls, but I agree with you. They were more maybe not as revelatory as they might have been, Dee Dee.
Well, clearly I think we're going to have a lot of post-mortem about the exit polls and what went wrong. It's going to be the equivalent of the VNS sort of dissection from 4 years ago. But there was something else, because President Bush's face when he went to vote in Crawford this morning was before there were any exit polls. There was something in the Bush camp polling that reinforced the feeling among the Democrats that this thing was trending toward Kerry.
Well, I think that's the question. I think we're going to be going through this. Andrew's been through this before, and I have. And I want to ask about I want to get back to Ron Silver again, because he's so good on this thing. You think a lot of people don't tell pollsters the truth?
I know they don't. I know it for a fact. I mean, if it wasn't, a breach of confidence, I know a lot of people in my professions that are voting for the president, and they've contributed to John Kerry's campaign, and they're out on the campaign trail for him. I know people.
Do you think show business is intolerant of Republicans?
I think there's a general intolerance on the part of the left in general now that precludes conversation in many, many areas. It's very interesting. I come from a community that applauds diversity and pluralism and tolerance, but it's impossible to have a conversation if you don't have a uniform opinion. And I think that's something that needs to be looked at. Should the Democrats lose the presidency tonight, there's going to be a lot of bloodletting, and there's going to be a fight for this party, because a lot of people, the Howard Deans, Kucinich's, the Michael Moore faction of the party, have zipped it up because they want to beat this president so badly. But starting tomorrow or the day after, should John Kerry not prevail, there's going to be an interesting fight going on in that party.
Well, the great thing talking to you, Ron, is you're so damn blunt about your politics. I love to hear it, because so many people are nuanced and you are so clear. By the way, you're telling me there's no lawn signs for the president in Beverly Hills. I love it. Anyway, let's go to Montana right now. We've got a call there. The president of the United States is the projected winner in the state of Montana. These states are falling into line, folks.
Hey, Chris,
they're falling into the traditional pattern of last time around. Look at this map.
Balkanized America here.
It's a pod. It's a reproduction. It's a cloning of last time around.
I wanted to follow up on what Ron Silver said, because I had several pollsters say it to me privately and also come on my show and tell me that, you know how sometimes if you have an African-American run in a suburban area.
Doug Wilder.
Yeah, they'll always say, yeah, I'm voting for the African-American.
Sure, race doesn't matter.
And then, of course, they underperform. I had more than 2 or 3 pollsters say they expected that to happen to George W. Bush this year. And Ron Silver's exactly right. People were actually embarrassed to tell the pollster that they were going to vote for George W. Bush. But I had people saying, expecting to possibly underperform by 2 to 3 points. And I think, I think Ron's right.
Well, we'll see when we go through the analysis. But even then, you got to wonder whether people, and as Ron suggested, I don't doubt this for a minute. And I've always thought that the pollster who called up had a sort of a country accent, maybe a NASCAR dad accent. You'd have a different reaction if you call it with perfect King's English. Oh, how are you intending to vote in the next? Are you voting for Mr. Frank Rizzo or the good man running? And you're going to get a certain reaction, right? That's what I always thought.
Well, and Pat Buchanan also talked about the focus, where we in the media focus. We focus in Palm Beach County. We focus on long lines in urban areas instead of, I will guarantee you, from what I understand, in Pensacola, Florida, at least an hour ago, there was still a precinct where there were 400 people waiting in line singing God Bless America, believing that it was their God-given right to stand there till hell froze over to vote for George W. Bush. So there's this intensity on both sides, and sometimes we in the media, I think, have a tendency to underreport the intensity on the red state side.
I think we have a question now. Is likely voters who've been watching now for months now, maybe we have to have a poll question, likely to tell the truth, the pollsters? Because I'm not sure we have an answer
seems
here.
a little bit more in the culture.
Because this Florida vote, by the way, based upon expectations, is a lot more favorable to the president so far, isn't it?
Oh, my God.
Oh,
yeah. 300,000.
Well, I would say that Bush is going to take Florida. That's just my guess. That by pretty soon, we will end up seeing it called for.
But I will say, Bush was consistently ahead through most of the campaign, and I think it was only in the end that it sort of tightened up and gave Democrats more hope. But I was just going to go back to, and maybe you're a better person to answer this, but Republicans have been sort of discouraged from talking to pollsters. I think there's something in the culture of conservatives and Republicans that says, don't even answer the questions when you walk out of the polling place. It's none of your business, and I'm not going to talk to you.
I can understand that point of view. Don't tell. Well, I have a private ballot. They had a machine here I'm allowed to vote secretly in, and you're telling me to give away my secret. I'm not going to do it. Let's take a look now. This is going to be one of the, if you are dispassionate enough to enjoy this, this is, not many people are, but let's try it anyway. This is the election of last year, 4 years ago. Let's look at it. Doesn't it look interesting? And you see it's contiguous, by the way. I used to say that Al Gore could have won the presidency by winning New Hampshire and flown all the way from Andrews Air Force Base all the way across the country without bumping into a state he carried. Now look at it tonight. Now it's morphed into basically the same product, the same developed picture of America, culturally conservative and culturally liberal. And it's so interesting because a lot of people who live in that red part look upon the bi-coastal folk from LA to New York as people looking down on them.
Yes.
Right, Laurent? Tell me about that, because they think it's flyover country.
They do think it's flyover. We've talked a lot about 9/11, and we've talked a lot about these sort of cultural issues, and I think there's a place where they intersect. 9/11 obviously had a great impact on everybody, and most people are concerned about security and terror attacks and that sort of thing. But I think particularly with men, it was a transformative moment because a lot of men in modern American society, like everybody else, sit around in cubicles all day and don't feel particularly manly. And 9/11 gave them a chance to feel like they were a part of something not only larger than themselves, but larger in a martial kind of way.
How so?
I'm a man. We're going to fight the terrorists. I'm part of this now. Ron Silver, I think, is a good example.
Are you picking a fight with Ron Silver?
No. But you know that Ron Silver's big issue is Iraq and the war on terror.
Right.
On social issues, he'll admit, frankly, environment and things. He's over on my end.
Could this not be a rational reaction to being attacked?
I don't think it's not irrational, but
I mean, rational. Couldn't it be rational?
Well, I don't know that's the thing I'm talking about is rational, but it is psychological.
Let's talk about a huge issue, and it's a huge issue not only in this election, not only for the reason why Democrats can't crack the Southeast, but also why Europeans don't like this president. And it comes down to faith. John Kerry never understood that you had to do more than just say that you were an altar boy growing up. Faith plays such an extraordinarily important role between New Jersey and Nevada. And the numbers show it. I mean, you look at the polling numbers and break it down. That's one of the reasons also why Europeans don't like this president. He is a man driven by faith. It's what also helps drive voters in the red states to the polls for him.
Okay, that's tricky territory. I may disagree and others might, but let's move on. I want to go to Tucker Eskew of the Bush campaign. When we come back from this commercial, we're going right to the Bush campaign for an update from the president's point of view.
Karl Rove came into the Roosevelt room where the senior staff had gathered, and he said, "We're going to win Florida," and we have. And then he said, "I think we're going to win Ohio," and we will. win because we have a terrific leader, someone we can all be proud to call our president. And I know that he would want me to say thank you to each one of you because we also have terrific supporters. It was really heartwarming today. We stopped in Ohio.
That's Karen Hughes, of course, a very close advisor to the president. We wanted you to hear this. It's a hot bit of the night.
Where the volunteers there had made 1.1 million calls in the last 3 or 4 days. And I know many of you and many of our supporters around the country have done the same thing. And the president would want me to tell you how grateful he is for all your help, for all your hard work. And I hope later tonight he'll be able to come over here and tell you thank you himself. Thank you all so much. It's great to see Florida in that win column. I'll tell you, as somebody who lived through those 36 days last time, it's nice to have it in President Bush's column.
Let's go to commercial right now. We'll come right back with Bush spokesman Tucker Esky.
And I hope you'll stay here.
MSNBC coverage of Decision 2004 brought to you by Wachovia Securities.
We keep calling him here at NBC. This state of Colorado now is coming up. We're going to make a call right there. Here he comes. We're calling it for President Bush, the projected winner in the state of Colorado. That was a disputed state. This is, although it's a red state from last time, it was in dispute. It was a hopeful state for the people supporting John Kerry. Let's go right now to Carter Esky to give us a sense of, he's a big man in the Bush campaign on our show an awful lot, and we appreciate him. Let's go to Tucker Esky right now. Tucker, let me ask you about your sense of the map as it's like a Polaroid film. It's developing right now, and it's beginning to look a lot like 2000. What do you think will be the differences?
Well, we're not quite ready to shake it like a Polaroid, Chris, but it feels good around here. It feels like the differences this year, well, the differences are you look in the state of Florida, for example, and go from Palm Beach up north, and you see county after county where we've outperformed our numbers and really outperformed our own goals for this year. You look at some of what's happening in Ohio, and you see us outperforming. You see us moving up with Catholics in Wisconsin. You see us moving up with Hispanics in Florida. So yes, I say we've outperformed ourselves. It's been a tough and still remains obviously a tough fight all the way, but we've done something outside the view of a lot of people. You were talking earlier about what happened. Did this go on beneath radar or beneath the planes over flyover country? I just think we're seeing something real about America that just not always tapped into by our 24/7 media culture. That's not a shot at the media. It's just a fact of life.
Just to correct you, Tucker, what I was talking about is the sense of people, that people have in the middle of the country, that the people flying over them may sense a sense of superiority over those people.
Oh, no,
and the
no,
people
Chris,
flying
I
over.
understand you.
That was what I wasn't talking about, not understanding. What I want to know from you now, since we're on the aggressive here, let me ask you to, Tucker, seriously, the president spent a lot of time in Pennsylvania, more than 40 trips up there. Why no go? Same in Wisconsin, or are you hopeful about Wisconsin tonight?
Still hopeful about Wisconsin, still looking closely at Iowa and particularly New Mexico, Chris. And I think Pennsylvania is an example of a political strategy that made the other side put a lot of resources in on defense. It's true, it hadn't gone our way. And if I can take just a moment, Chris, I agree with you. I understand exactly what you meant about flyover country, and in fact was sort of elaborating on that point. I think there's just a way sometimes for all of us who are so close to it to sometimes not see what's developing out there, and President Bush taps into something real with people. He's developed a bond with most Americans. Now, those bonds aren't built on just doing what's popular, so he doesn't enjoy 70-80% approval rating consistently across this whole term. But those bonds are real, and it's because he wears his heart on his sleeve. People think they know him, and they do, and he has a good sense of himself without being selfish. Those are, I think, the qualities that are helping us tonight.
Let's flip this around, and I'll ask you a question which may not have an answer. Why is the president unsuccessful as a candidate for re-election to the presidency of the United States, unable to tap into the hearts of people who live on the coast, the Californians, the New Yorkers, the New Englanders, the Easterners, the far Westerners? Why can't he win those states?
Well, we are deeply divided, Chris. I think this is something we'll study for a long time.
Here's a big one for your side, for the president's campaign. George W. Bush, the projected winner in the state of Florida. That's 2 out of the 3 of the big ones. Ohio's still to go. What does that mean for your campaign, Tucker?
It's huge, Chris. It's absolutely giant. 4 years ago tonight, we all thought we had Florida and learned the hard way. We did, but it was closer than we wanted it to be. This is a bigger win than we expected, as I said, because of numbers that turned out better than we expected in a lot of the state. And we held the margins down in the Democratic counties. Broward didn't do what they wanted it to. So we're really, really excited about Florida. And I've got to say, the mood around here about Ohio, the people who are looking at it county by county, waiting to see the final numbers come out of Hamilton County, looking at what Democrats were able to do in Cuyahoga, we feel that Ohio is just about ready to be there. We're very excited about that, too.
If you went on a world trip tomorrow, Tucker, and you've been on our show, and you've been so good on our show so many times, if you went on a world trip and you took that map with you and you tried to explain that in Turkey or tried to explain that in Australia or in China, that map we just saw, which shows the whole center part of the country and southern part red and the other part blue on the 2 coasts in the Northeast, how would you explain that difference to people outside this country?
Well, I think we will unify around our next president. Whichever man is elected, we feel real good about our chances, obviously. I think it's a tapestry. The stars and stripes together make up a diverse and beautiful and strong country that's expressed itself powerfully with high turnout in the purest, freest expression of a democracy. It's a wonderful, beautiful thing. All Americans can take pride, winners and losers tonight, in a peaceful election that moves forward this relatively young democracy in very turbulent times. It's a story we can tell proudly, and we got a better job to do of telling that story around the world, and I know President Bush wants to do that.
Okay, well said. Thank you very much for coming on the program tonight. Tucker Eskew of the Bush campaign, thank you once again for coming on. We have a special guest joining us right now, not necessarily from the political world, but certainly from the world of American culture. Pete Diddy, who's probably better known than Tucker Eskew or me or anybody else here. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you for having me.
You did a lot of work, Pete Diddy, to get the vote out. What do you feel about your results?
It's been extremely successful. For the first time in a long time, young people are energized. They're interested in the voting process. They're empowered. They were in those long lines waiting for hours and hours. The colleges came out. The youth vote has really made their voices heard in this election.
Do you have any numbers to suggest that you've really blossomed here in terms of numbers, or at the same old, same old?
We positioned, partnered with Choose or Lose and MTV. We wanted to exceed 20 million. We've exceeded the 20 million, and the numbers are still coming in. And we know when it gets down in Ohio right now that we're gonna be part of the final deciding factor.
You know, I was looking at the numbers. We have these polls that we take, the exit polls, and we can talk about them now, the particular questions. I was stunned to see that young voters, 18 to 29, were basically 50-50 on the war with Iraq. 50-50 on whether we should have. Does that surprise you? And you think they're not telling the truth, or what?
No, I think that a lot of young people are dealing with issues right here at home, real life issues.
No, but 50-50 on the war in Iraq. Didn't that surprise you?
It didn't really surprise me. Young people, their ideas and their thoughts, people underestimate, how their ideas and their thoughts and where they can go. And I think they've had a huge impact on this election. People they're the wild card of the election. You can't put them in a box and say you know which way they're going to go.
What are the issues that nail? If you said you're watching these kids walk in line, young people, I shouldn't call them kids, they're in their late 20s, some of them. What's moving them? What got them to the polls?
Their future, worrying about education, worrying about jobs, worrying about how to pay for education, health care, things that are happening right here at home in their communities.
How do they think differently than somebody 70 years old?
They're just getting involved in the process. They're just learning. I heard you talking earlier, and they still have power. They still have power. If they're old enough to go fight overseas, they're old enough to vote.
Yeah. Well, what do you think the future is if the president's reelected pretty much like he was last time? Do you think people are going to walk away saying, I made a difference?
I think that all the numbers have to come in, and the numbers are going to speak for themselves, And I know that our voting community was up this year. just like all voting communities were. And, it's going to come down to the final numbers. We'll have to wait till later on tonight or tomorrow.
How much you put into this in terms of time and money?
I mean, I put a lot of, anything I do, I give my all to it. I believe that.
Your name's been associated with this in terms of putting this together for months, if not years now. When did you get started with it?
No, it's only been a couple of months. It's only been a couple of months. I started it because I'm from Harlem, New York, an inner city community, and things are not changing there. I didn't feel either candidate had an urban agenda. So I went after the youth and minority vote, and I think that we were able to bring them out and get them interested, and I think the numbers are going to speak for itself, and I think we're going to have a final impact on this election. It's close, and we're the wild card,
Speaking of minority vote, I saw something, and a lot of us have talked about it, about the Democrats not getting the usual black vote, about 90-some%. They got less than that because they pushed some of these avant-garde, state-of-the-art social causes like gay marriage. Do you think that's heard among the black community?
I don't think either campaign has really truly paid attention to the minority vote, nor the youth vote, and hopefully in the future that will change. That's why it was so important for us to come out so strong in this election, because they're not going to respect us as a voting bloc until we really come out and vote.
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I know you're the most famous guy that's been on this desk, so I want to respect you for coming here.
I'm a big fan of y'all.
Hey! I get an autograph from you. Anyway, I want to go to Ron Reagan, who speaks for our culture. He's our cultural expert here. I need it, because you do connect with it. You've been in dancing, you've been in all that theater work, as my son is, and I do respect it. And I want to know, what is it? Is this going to be depressing to feel that this election has begun to replicate so much the last one?
Well, it's true. I mean, it is depressing in a way because it seems so.
I'm talking about the Creative Coalition you're active in, groups like that.
Yeah. Well, listen, yes, it's going to be very depressing for a lot of people, I can tell you, if George Bush wins again. People who care about the environment, people who care about stem cell research, people who care about science as opposed to religion, frankly. I mean, Joe was talking earlier.
You went out to that Republican
faith.
convention and you took a stand, and I'm just wondering whether that's reflected anywhere in these results, this kind of cultural positive argument from the liberal side.
Well, I mean, the country is divided that way. And Joe, as I was saying, was talking about faith. It's not that Kerry doesn't have faith. When he was talking about it during the debates, actually he was quite eloquent on it. And he talked about faith in terms of the other, whereas George Bush mostly talked about faith in terms of himself and what he does.
He personalized it. And again, I'm not knocking John Kerry. You're not saying John Kerry should wear his faith on his sleeve. I just know that a lot of people that know Kerry have said that he doesn't talk about it very much. And again, George Bush is always, for better or for worse, connected in the red states by talking about his faith.
It's a very different kind of faith.
We got a call to make, Didi, next. We have a call to make in the Senate contest in the state of Colorado. Let's take a look. Ken Salazar, very interesting. I don't think he was predicted to be ahead in this race. Ken Salazar, the Democrat, defeating the much better known Pete Coors. That's an interesting race in the balance of the fight for the balance of power in the Senate. You want to say something, Joe?
I certainly do. Speaking of faith, I was talking to a friend out in Colorado who was active in politics earlier today. I said, I'm a libertarian sort of Republican. My kids and I watch South Park. We see a lot of things that other parents wouldn't let their kids watch.
You watch Sopranos too?
Of course, but not with my kids.
Right.
But whenever those Coors commercials would come on during football games, I'd always change the channel in front of my 15, 16-year-old kids. And so I asked a friend out in Colorado, how does a guy who runs a company, the whole Twins commercial and basically sex and whatever else for every college student, how does he appeal to the Republican, conservative, Christian base? And the answer was, he doesn't.
And they were paying attention.
They did up in Canada. They also had these very body kind of events to try to sell beer in Canada, and that got played back, filtered back to Colorado.
The Pete Coors that used to do the commercials walking.
Let's go to an expert now who's got the numbers. Brian Williams, thank you. It's a perfect time to ask you about, when you look at the numbers today and the exit polls, etc., what are we learning about how people vote on their values?
Well, this is a real red-blue area I'm about to take you through, Chris, because so much of the debate in the campaign was about terrorism and the war in Iraq, and John Kerry worked that very hard along with the economy. Yet, in a surprise development, this issue of moral values, not necessarily Coors commercials specifically, but it's all-encompassing, moral values mentioned as frequently by voters as any of the above. In polls leading up to the election, we only heard from about 1 in 10 voters about this, that moral values was important to them. But today, a full 21% said moral values was the most important issue to them as they made their decision today. About the same number as mentioned the economy, by the way. More people than mentioned terrorism at 18%. And voters who picked moral values as their own overwhelmingly voted today for George W. Bush. 78% went for the president. Just 19% of the moral value vote, if we can call it that, went for John Kerry. Moral values were especially important today to one of the key components of President Bush's base, white evangelical Protestants. They turned out to vote as they promised to. They made up more than 1 in 5 voters today. These voters were especially likely to mention moral values when they got to the polls. Fully 3/4 of them went for Bush. Now to the issue of gay marriage. Both candidates were opposed to it, but it was President Bush that made it an issue, even though passage was impossible, with his support for a constitutional amendment to ban it. Most voters today agreed. Gay and lesbian couples, they say, should not be allowed to legally marry. Only 27% favored gay marriage, but another third approved of something called civil unions. And 35% oppose any legal recognition of couples of the same sex. President Bush won a huge majority among that last group. Kerry got a big majority among those who favored legalizing gay marriage. Among those favoring civil unions, an even split between the two candidates. So we're going to talk about this map. We're going to talk about our divided country now, apparently for 4 more years, Chris, and moral values, the new umbrella term emerging right here in our numbers tonight.
Okay, we're going to come right back after this and have a lot of discussion about that very point, which is fascinating to me, those numbers. But more importantly, lots more returns coming back when we come back on MSNBC's coverage here at Democracy Plaza in just a minute. John Fund of Wall Street Journal Opinion.com. He's got some insight as to what the president's being told by his top advisors. John.
Well, the president was told by Karl Rove a little bit before 11 o'clock tonight that Mr. Rove was convinced that Ohio would go to Mr. Bush, and a little bit later, Mr. Rove told the president that New Mexico would also go to Mr. Bush. And if you look at the numbers, Chris, yes, Cuyahoga County is still out, and Kerry has done very well, especially bringing in a lot of new voters. But Bush has outperformed his 2,000 totals in the rural areas around Columbiana County and also in parts of the suburbs around Franklin County.
Any sense from what you've gotten so far? This is great news for us to have. But do you have any sense about what Rove's telling the president about those Great Lakes states?
Yes, Michigan, believe it or not, is leaning Kerry, but still in play. Ed Sarpolis, the leading pollster in Michigan, has Michigan at 50-49 ultimately for Kerry. It's within the margin of dispute or litigation. Wisconsin, right now the margin I think is around 14,000 votes in Wisconsin. That's still in play. Kerry can still win, and Kerry may well litigate, but he has to run the table.
Okay, let me ask you about the importance of Ohio. You say that Karl Rove has told the president that Ohio is going for him. Let me ask you, does that suggest in itself that the president will win re-election?
I think if Ohio and New Mexico, combined with what the president already has, it makes it extremely difficult for Kerry to win. However, remember, there are 14,000 lawyers in this campaign that weren't there in the year 2000. There's going to be lots to litigate. There are provisional ballots to count. There are absentee ballots to count. We may have an almost definite answer tonight, but it also will be going to the courts, I think.
Which state's most likely to be the Florida of 2004? Is it Ohio?
Ohio is ground zero. Wisconsin, which has same-day voter registration, a lot of controversies there. Michigan, conceivably. New Mexico has notoriously sloppy counting practices. In 2000, it took them 2 weeks to decide that Al Gore won that state by 300 votes. So we're going to see lots of controversy and lots of litigation.
But if the president's party, if the president's able to win the electoral votes of Ohio, and pick up a couple of the Great Lakes states, including Michigan, it seems to me that might put the election beyond the reach of even very good lawyers.
That's beyond the margin of litigation at that point, Chris. You're right.
That's a hell of a term, isn't it? The margin of litigation. Thank you very much, John Fund. We're all using that term right now.
Chris, if he wins Ohio, he gets up to 266, and then he's going to win Alaska's 3 electoral votes. That gets him to the 269, and he's re-elected president. So,
no, it's a tie if it's 269, 269.
Yeah. Right.
But then he is, I guess, re-elected. He goes to the House.
Let's go to stalwart for John Kerry up in Massachusetts, the headquarters in Boston. Let's go right now to U.S. Congressman Harold Ford, who's up there waiting for us right now. Congressman Ford, what is, well, you have a happy face, sir, but let me ask you, what is your mood about the election right now as the count comes in?
It's all about Ohio. I've been listening to your show and your network show and others, and it's obvious that as we wait for these numbers out of this big county there near Cleveland, or at Cleveland's encompassed in. I know Joe Scarborough just indicated that with Alaska's votes, and I heard Dee Dee as well make the comment, we remain confident here. You have to remember, Chris, the Red Sox were down 3-0 to the Yankees, and there's still a lot of optimism here in Boston, a lot of optimism in the Kerry camp. It's going to be a long night, and we're prepared for whatever steps and however aggressive we have to be to ensure that all of the votes are counted.
When you look at the map, Congressman, it looks so much like the map of 2000. What do you make of that?
This country is still very divided on a lot of issues. People are very spirited, and there's a lot of energy around the war and the economy and cultural issues, as we've seen evidence themselves in some of the southern Senate races across the country. But this presidential race, I think, is going to boil down to what happens here in Ohio and how these votes come in over the next few hours. Your network has estimated that come 2, maybe 3 o'clock in the morning East Coast time, we'll get a sense of what the final count is there in Ohio. And that will determine, along with New Mexico and Iowa and Wisconsin, how John Kerry fares. And again, we remain optimistic here in Boston that things will turn out in our favor.
Congressman, when we started the evening, we began thinking about it many hours ago. We thought about total turnout as being a decisive factor. Are you sanguine about the number of people that showed up to vote today being enough to elect a Democratic president?
You know, it's amazing. As someone that loves politics, I step back for one moment, and I love big turnouts. It's a good thing for the country.
Okay, just a minute, Mr. Ford. Congressman, we've got to go now to some bad news for the Democrats, some very good news for the president and his supporters. Ohio, according to NBC's projections, will go at the end of the night when all the votes are counted to the president of the United States. 51 votes up there represent right now, but what a big win. That's, I would say, based upon working here, that's a carefully made projection, Congressman. Like the others before it, there's not going to be any reversals tonight. Look at these numbers. They've filled in there. Again, a state the president carried in his election in 2000. He's carried again according to our projections. Your comment, Congressman.
If those numbers are true, then we obviously will face a difficult time, a much more difficult time going forward. We've not concluded that yet here in this headquarters, so it's difficult to say. I know the network has projected what you're projecting, but I'm going to wait and see and hear from those on the ground in Ohio and ensure that we've got the right count.
With you again. This news keeps coming, and here it is. Another one could be decisive. Alaska, the projected winner. Alaska is President Bush. We were just hearing from Joe Scarborough about the significance. Joe, you think that's enough now?
Well, no, it is enough. I mean, you're at 246 after Florida falls. You had 20 from Ohio. You had the 3 from Alaska. You were at 269. That means the tie goes to the president. And George Bush, if these projections are correct, has just been reelected president of the United States.
Let's go back to Congressman Ford. Congressman Ford, on a good night, looking forward, the Democratic challenger could win Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, and could still lose this election. That's a tough night, isn't it?
If the numbers hold up as you say, Chris, it is a tough night and certainly presents a difficult mathematical equation for us. All of these numbers have come in since being on the air with you, so I want to wait until we get back in the war room and are able to compute these numbers. But if what you're saying is true and the number, the way you all have projected it, it's a tough time for us at this point.
Okay, you're a great guy to come on. You're always welcome on this show, Congressman Ford. By the way, you are the youth of the future, and I keep wondering where was the youth tonight in this vote turnout. Anyway, we'll be right back with you later on tonight if you have more information. Thank you, Joe. Back to you. You've sized up. You've got math there to kill. What's left for the president to pick up? What's his most likely pickup now to take him over the top?
Well, Nevada. He's doing well. He's doing well in New Mexico. That's really all he needs.
He needs 4 votes, so he needs 1.
Yeah, I mean, if he wins New Mexico or Nevada, he doesn't have to go to the House of Representatives. But regardless, if these numbers hold up again, just so our viewers know what we're talking about, and we're not talking in shorthand, 269 is. I mean, if John Kerry runs the board, he'll have 269. The vote would then go to the House of Representatives. George W. Bush would win that. But it's not going to happen. I mean, Nevada or New Mexico, most likely going to fall George Bush's way.
Let's just point out what happens if it were to go to the House of Representatives. Then in the House of Representatives, because it is a Republican-dominated House, the president would have more votes.
Let's go right now. We got a big call, a news opportunity now. Nora O'Donnell at the White House. Tell us what's happening.
Well, Chris, the vice president's motorcade has been assembled. He has left his residence at the Naval Observatory, presumably headed here or to the Reagan building. The president's motorcade is also starting to assemble, the travel pool, meaning that the president could shortly be headed over to the Ronald Reagan building, where it had been planned there would be a celebration or a speech by the president where he announced that he did not win and deliver his concession speech. So there are things that are starting to move, just a little color about sort of what happens at a time like this. Also, the White House has called up the photographers, the still photographers for the Time magazines, the News Weekly Time magazines. They have been summoned up at the residence. We don't know why yet, but obviously to take pictures of the president, perhaps making a phone call, perhaps with his family, watching the returns. All of that's starting to take place here at the White House. Some of the things that are moving around, as you know, of course, all of these states, significant states, called in the president's favor. It was several hours ago that I ran into the 41st president, former President Bush, who clearly had had a pretty emotional day and said to me that I'm feeling good now. They, of course, were through an emotional roller coaster here at the White House, in part because of those early exit poll numbers, which suggested that Kerry was ahead. Then some of the votes started to start rolling in, the actual votes, and that's when we started hearing from campaign officials, from White House officials, that those exit polls didn't jive with the actual vote counts that they were seeing in counties in Florida and in Ohio, Chris. So some things going on, starting to move here, and it looks like the president at this hour and shortly could be headed over to the Ronald Reagan building to address thousands of supporters that are gathered there to hear him speak tonight. Chris?
Okay, Nora, keep reporting back to us as the night goes on. This is getting very interesting now. Thank you, Nora O'Donnell at the White House with the presidential party. The tradition in this country, and I think some traditions do hold, join me in this, Andrea, that the losing candidate, if we have one in the next couple hours, will give a concession speech. John Kerry has said before that he will speak tonight. He will have to say something in the next couple hours. I don't think the President of the United States will make a victory speech without having heard something somewhat declarative from the other guy.
It's hard to say. If the Kerry people, depending on what happens next, if the Kerry people were to decide that there are still people voting in Ohio and that they've got enough absentee ballots elsewhere and provisional ballots, and if they believe they want to push this, they won't concede because of the lessons of Al Gore, and you might hear from the President of the United States. I think you might hear a preemptive shot.
Well, let's go right now to Carl Kennedy and get a reading. Let's get a reading on that from Carl, who's up at the Boston headquarters of the Challenger. Carl Kennedy, what's happening? Any word of a possible statement by the Challenger?
There is no word yet, Chris, about when we might see Kerry. There was actually a pool reporter who was close to the House and filed a report a few minutes ago saying he had been able to see Kerry through a window, through a third-floor window, who appeared to pick up some papers off the floor. But other than that, there was no activity, and we have not been told at what point Kerry might leave his house, come to the West End as he was expected to make any kind of concession speech. All of this has happened remarkably quickly, just as a rain has sort of settled over Copley Place here. It wasn't too long ago, Chris, that the crowd was chanting, Boston wants a party, Boston wants a party. But once Florida fell, and once the campaign began pointing so strongly to Ohio, and then once Ohio fell, it does appear, at least in the minds of many people here, that that party is not coming tonight, Chris.
Okay, Carl, we'll be back to you, and whenever we get word from you, you want us back, because this is obviously getting close to an important knowledge for all of us as to who won this election. Let's go right now to Charlie Cook, who's one of the world's great experts on American politics. Charlie, give me a sense of how this thing's going right now. We just saw Ohio fall into the president's column. Is that decisive?
Well, we're about one hair short of a trifecta for Republicans. They've held on to the House. Right now they've got 50 seats in the Senate locked down, and there are 5 more to go, three Democratic, 2 Republicans. So they're a hair short of nailing down their majority there. And when you're at 269 with the states you've got left, it's hard to see how they don't pick up something there. So, we're not quite there yet, but it's we're within a hair of this thing, of Republicans hitting all 3.
What's the next apple to fall from the tree, do you think, for the president?
Well, I think Nevada, but I haven't watched to see which one's likely to fall over first, but that's the one that, I think looks probably the toughest for him. But, boy, what's at the Winston Churchill is nothing more exhilarating than having been shot at and missed. And I think Republicans have to feel awfully exhilarated today.
Yeah, we're looking at the Nevada numbers. We just showed them. They're even according to the count so far. When you look at this race, it's kind of been a roller coaster ride for both candidates. The president had a bad couple of days. He's obviously looking very happy right now based upon the visual sighting we got of him and also the numbers we're all watching, and he's watching as well. What do you make of the Kerry campaign in the closing days? They seem to have found something in the explosives issue, the fact that explosives were allowed to be lost basically as our troops arrived in Iraq, and that was an issue pushed for a week with the help, I must say, of the New York Times. It was pushed heavily. Do you think that there was any hope there for Kerry in the last couple of weeks, or he was just too far behind?
Well, I think they closed well, but I think Democrats they're going to have to come to grips with the fact that they are not doing well with small town and rural voters, and it's not just in the South or border South. But you look at Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin, those 3 states went for every Democrat in 1988, in 1992, 1996, 2000, and Kerry's had to fight like hell for these states. And there's, you would think that a Democrat would be doing better in those states, and Al Gore had to fight for him, and Kerry's had an even tougher time. And I think there's just a social, cultural disconnect that Democrats have, that they're seen as sort of too secular a party for these small town rural voters. And I think that's a problem. I think the other thing is that Kerry didn't connect. I mean, if you think about when challengers have successfully beat incumbent presidents in the last 30 years, they've been a very interesting people, interesting or compelling people with perfect messages for the year. Jimmy Carter was a fascinating person, whether you liked him or not. Ronald Reagan was a fascinating person. Bill Clinton was a fascinating person. Each one of them had a perfect message for the year. And it's kind of hard to see, John Kerry fit hand in glove the way those other 3 guys did when they knocked off their incumbents. So I think there were a lot of things. There are a lot of moving parts to this election.
The Republicans were very good at playing on what might have been Kerry's problems to begin with, the fact that he was too Eastern, too elite, too French, too European educated. And maybe they had an easy target. Do you think that? Maybe he seems like the kind of guy you wouldn't bump into in a diner somewhere in Sioux City. He just seems different, looks different, behaves differently than a lot of people in the middle of the country. You think that's it, or do you think he just didn't campaign well enough?
Well, no, I think you're onto something there, and I don't want to pile on the guy right now, but
I'm trying to give him a break and say he did a good campaign based on what he started with.
Don't worry, Chris. I'm about to stick the knife in. The question is, did the guy add any value to the ticket? In other words, would any other Joe or Jane generic Democrat be getting any fewer votes than Kerry got tonight? And I'm not sure about that.
Well, that's the question that has pervaded the campaign. The president could never really seem to break 50. The Democratic candidate, John Kerry, could never seem to get much above 45. And do you think that may be the reality we end with?
I think so. And also, you have to hand it to the Bush folks. They ran a fabulous campaign. This was the best run presidential campaign I've ever seen with the Bush guys. I think the Kerry campaign had a very competent campaign. But boy, these Bush guys, they just didn't miss a trick anywhere.
But that said, why did the polls show people all thinking, and even the ones when the pundits, me included, didn't think the same thing happened? They kept saying Kerry won the debates all 3 times. How do you figure? They all thought he won, the people thought he won, but they didn't vote for him. At least not enough numbers to win.
Well, the third debate, I think, people responded. I think clearly people think that President Bush jumped up in the polls after the third debate. Now, whether he won or not, he went up. So, I'll give it to him for that. But, I don't think people are scoring on debate points. I don't think that's what these debates are all about. But it's, I think Kerry was a good candidate, but not a great candidate. I think his campaign was good, but not great. I think the president had huge liabilities. I think another Democrat might have been able to take him tonight, but I think they ran a great campaign. And it's what team do you have on the field, and how do you play that day? And the Bush folks did very, very well.
Andrea.
I think Charlie is really onto something, especially when you talk about the cultural issues. And the bottom line is that, at least if you believe the exit polling, moral values, as defined by the Republican campaign, is the equivalent of economic issues in terms of what people cared about. Anytime you've got a campaign where people care as much about moral values than about the economy, especially at a time when the economy has not been perceived by many people as doing that well. This is pretty extraordinary.
That is one of the most remarkable numbers, that 21% in the exit polling of NBC select moral values as the number one issue, in economics 20%, and terrorism below that.
And let me just complete the thought, because the way the Swift Vote veterans and the other groups defined John Kerry early in the campaign is to make him seem as though he was not in sync with moral values because he was, a flip-flopper or whatever. By having defined him that way, they really put him in a box, and it was very hard for him to get out of that box.
Right. It's a very interesting moment in our politics, because for most of the last 100 years, our politics have been defined by economic interests, and you could tell, what people's economic interests were by how they vote. That's no longer true. The 20% of people who said the economy was the most important issue probably voted, substantially for Kerry, but nowhere near the numbers of people who said that moral values, moral issues were the most important, voted overwhelmingly for President Bush. That is the most defining basket of issues.
I've been saying for some time, I still believe it. I think tonight bears it out. You bring up the Swift vets. It's not about what John Kerry did when he was over there. It's about what he did when he came home. I still believe Vietnam defines the electorate in so many ways. The 1960s defines the electorate in so many ways. The Democratic Party was not able to get around that because they had a candidate that testified in a way that deeply offended many people there.
There's something, I think that's largely true, but still, if you go back to the 70s and 80s, economic issues were still better determinants of how people voted. Here we are in 2004, and economic issues no longer, can we look at them and say, that's going to determine how people vote? There's some other big sea change that we're in the midst of.
Well, the economy, though, and listen, the economy in 2004 was not that different from the economy in 1996. This George W. Bush economy is much better than the Bush economy in 1992 that Bill Clinton got elected by. That's one of the reasons why the economics at the end didn't make a big difference. Listen, the unemployment rate, we can argue about how much somebody's getting paid per hour, but with the unemployment rate at about 5.4%, with economic growth around 4% this quarter, listen, that's not the roaring 90s, but that ain't 1992.
You take a state like Ohio, where you have a loss of 250,000 plus manufacturing jobs. The wrong track numbers are high. The sense of anxiety is very high. People do not feel good in Ohio, and yet George Bush has won that state.
They vote.
See, that's this moral value question. I think induces people to, in many cases, like in Ohio, vote against their economic interests.
I was actually talking to Phil Griffin this morning. We were talking about Phil Griffin. I'm sorry, Vice President, MSNBC, and we were talking about these states, and I said, Phil, it really is a red state. And I was saying, well, I thought Ohio was going to fall for George W. Bush. I said, Pennsylvania, as I said to you earlier, is really a red state if you take out Philadelphia. And as you keep moving to middle America, you get to Ohio. That's where they test market so many products. It is the heartland of America. George W. Bush, it drives people crazy on both the coasts, but George W. Bush plays for the heartland of America, and it's those values that got him elected.
Well, something may have done it again, because we're looking right now. Let's take a look right now at the Vice President's motorcade heading from the Vice President's house toward the White House, which is a sign that they're about to group for a final photo op of the night, otherwise known as a victory speech, coming fairly soon now. It looks like they're getting together. They're probably going to have a victory portrait of both families right now. That's, by the way, I drive by there all the time. It's on Massachusetts Avenue.
It's about 5 minutes from the White House.
Right. They're heading down to Rock Creek Parkway, where they're going to ride all the way to the White House. It's a very familiar route for me. The Vice President's clearly going to be part of this victory, and the victory does seem imminent right now. Let me go to some other people. There's Ron Silver and Hillary Rosen we haven't talked to for a while. In fact, we haven't talked to her tonight. Hillary, are you despondent over the fact that apparently the Republican Party has to some extent won this campaign on values?
Well, I might be the skunk at the party here, folks, but I just don't see that Ohio is so clearly in the president's camp. I mean, with all due respect to our talented team behind the scenes at NBC News, just as recently as 20 or 25 minutes ago, there were still thousands of people standing in line, handed out, and they were handed out paper ballots. So I will be surprised if the Kerry campaign comes out and concedes Ohio.
Do you think they shouldn't?
Well, I think that there's going to be a lot of pressure from Democrats around the country for him not to, because I think we have seen in the past what's happened when we prematurely hand them the platform to say that they've won. That gives you a huge psychological advantage that I don't think John Kerry should hand over right now.
But unlike 4 years ago, John Kerry, unlike Al Gore, is not approaching 270 electoral votes at this point, and the president is. Isn't that a difference?
Well, I don't think it's a difference when you think that, we're likely to see Michigan and Minnesota and Wisconsin and even Iowa fall for Kerry. And so I think those numbers are still there.
Okay, let's go to Brian Williams now to go through what may have happened to explain this decision by NBC, actually, and perhaps the reality as well, to give the president the state of Ohio. Brian.
Well, all of this, of course, Chris, predicated on the fact that it is a call at this hour, but we like to use these exit polls to go back in and deconstruct what happened there. Again, if this is an apparent big win by the president in Ohio, a state that, by the way, has struggled economically during the Bush years, 16% of its manufacturing jobs lost since March 2001. And our NBC News exit poll in Ohio finds among the voters a high level of unhappiness with the state's economy. When asked to rate economic conditions in their state, 6 in 10 people said not good, while less than 4 in 10 take a positive view. Nonetheless, and this will be talked about and debated if it becomes the fact, John Kerry couldn't capitalize on that and close the deal. When Ohio voters were asked if they trusted the presidential candidates to deal with the economy, equal numbers said they trust each presidential candidate to handle that area, even though incumbents usually get much more of the blame for economic problems and sometimes get hammered. As for who voted, white evangelicals, 25% of the voters in Ohio. President Bush took 3/4 of that group. Chris, these numbers are fascinating when you look at the internals, how people voted, why they voted, which numbers coming out. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Brian Williams. Just to show there the power of the fact that much of Ohio is very much part of the Bible Belt, a very Baptist area, very culturally conservative area. It's not all the ethnic people up around the Great Lakes. Anyway, we'll be right back with more analysis and hopefully better understanding of this race, but also a lot more numbers, a lot more state information about Senate races, more results to give you from MSNBC.
What I seek every single day is perfection. I want you to guess how many checks we process each day. Try more than 40 million, more than any other company in America. But what's truly impressive is the accuracy with which we take care of them. I'm Lance Drummond, I'm a banker, and I'm proud to be part of Bank of America. If you weren't a perfectionist, you couldn't do this job. One error in a million is simply unacceptable. So at Bank of America, we customize our own equipment. We engineer our own software, create our own quality control systems. To us, this is like an assembly line that is mission critical, meaning 0 defects. This isn't about processing nearly 11 billion checks a year flawlessly. It's a matter of accurately handling one single check and then repeating it 11 billion times.
Bank of America, higher standards.
By The West Wing, the complete 3rd season. Global tensions, a heated election.
To the enemies of freedom, you will be brought to light and ended.
Includes an acclaimed documentary.
It talks of history and it talks of friendship.
The West Wing, the complete 3rd season on DVD. Buy it today.
Liberty Mutual's planned for it. We have pre-approved contractors who can make emergency repairs within 24 hours. Liberty Mutual. It's more than insurance. It's insurance in action.
By The West Wing, the complete 3rd season. Global tensions, a heated election.
To the enemies of freedom, you will be brought to light and ended.
Includes an acclaimed documentary.
It talks of history and it talks of friendship.
The West Wing, the complete 3rd season on DVD. Buy it today.
Let's go for some more late night information on Ohio with Chris Chansing, who's in Cleveland. Chris.
An extraordinary piece of litigation.
Bob Bennett, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks,
You're pretty
Chris.
confident right now.
Well, I think it's a tremendous victory in Ohio for President Bush.
What was the difference?
It looks like it's going to be between 100 and 150,000 plus votes. Even with the loss in Cuyahoga County, that's still a tremendous victory for the president.
Now, statement, you praised the other side. They had a tremendous ground game. They got out supporters in ways that they've never done before. Why do you think the president still came out ahead?
Well, I think that this was an election where I think you're going to see that it was the largest turnout in Ohio's history, and I think everybody's ground game contributed to votes for their candidate. And I wanted to give credit where credit was due, because in the urban counties, particularly, the Democrats did very well in getting their vote out, and in the rural and the smaller counties is where we won it in Ohio, in our ring counties.
Do you have the final numbers yet? Are you still waiting for
No,
the
we're still waiting on,
percentages?
because the counties that are out are still appear to be the Republican counties that haven't reported to Columbus yet. The major urban counties, all their votes are in. So.
This is still a pretty divided state, a very divided nation. You and I were talking about this earlier. How does President Bush, if indeed he wins this election, how does he bring the country back together?
I think President Bush will tell you is I think compassionate conservatism again will rule, but I think that any president in the second term will act differently, and I think that you're going to find that the president is going to address the issues that are important to the nation that he discussed in his campaign, and I think that you'll find a Congress will be willing to work with him, and I think going to make a big difference, and I look for good things to happen in the next 4 years.
Bob Bennett, Ohio Republican Chairman. Thanks very much. Appreciate it. We've been doing this all along. Both sides had Ohio at the top of their must-win list, ground zero for this election, and now called for George W. Bush. Chris?
Okay, Chris Chansing. Let's go right now to Keith Oberman with some more information and results. Keith.
All right, Chris, let's go through the House of Representatives. Obviously a Republican stronghold these last 2 years. It will give you all 435 results, not individually, just as a projection. The night began with the Republicans ahead 227 to 205 with one independent. Our NBC News projection is that they will add 8 seats, plus or minus 4 seats. That's a projection indeed. 232, 202, approximately the expected new House. 4 redistricted Democrats already off the board in Texas is an example supporting that evidence. So minor gains for the Republicans expected in the House of Representatives. We've been talking all night about the ballot props around the nation. 11 separate ones defining marriage as being between a man and a woman, variously reported as amendments, constitutional amendments. Amendment 2 in Michigan, NBC News projecting it will pass there. Obviously, you see it by 500,000 votes. In Montana, it's C-96, requires a state constitution to define marriage between a man and a woman. It's going to pass by about 2-1 there. And in Utah, it is Amendment 3, defining marriage simply as a union between a man and a woman, and that is projected as coming out in favor of that, in fact, definition therein. There's one other I wanted to report to you, Chris. South Carolina, the amendment has passed, and liquor can now be sold in forms other than 2-ounce bottles, which sounds like a good idea for all of us here on the panel. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Keith. That was an interesting one. You know, it's impossible to look at this. I'm looking right at you, Ron. Yeah. I'm looking right at you. These cultural issues. Stem cell was not a voting issue, and that's your issue. But this other cultural issue of gay marriage, it seems like every time people get in that voting booth, no matter what is said about the polling even we showed tonight, which showed more than a third of the country open to the idea of gay partnership recognition. Sure. Some kind of legal recognition that doesn't quite meet the definition of marriage. They go very right-wing inside that booth.
Yeah, they do. They do. Now, people get very upset when you use the word homophobia, but there is a latent homophobia in this country. You know,
but in the secrecy of that booth, it's not like a gay couple living next door to you. It's not like gay teachers' issues. It's just in that booth. They vote against gays getting married. And what do you think that is?
Well, I've heard religious reasons for that. I've heard political reasons for supporting these sorts of amendments, and I've heard emotional reasons. I have yet to hear a practical reason why gay marriage hurts anybody.
I think it's the word. Let me suggest, it's the word.
Yes, it is.
It is the word.
Yeah, it's not a rational choice here. It's not somebody going in and saying, well, there will be these consequences, actual practical consequences, if Steve and Bill can marry. They're saying, it just creeps me out, and I don't want it, and I'm going to vote against it.
And of course, John Kerry is against this as well, even though it goes against a key constituency of the Democratic Party.
But nobody believes him.
Nobody believed him.
So I'm glad you said it, because I said it. No one believes that John Kerry was against gay marriage.
The thing is, though, John Kerry, again, on so many issues, tried to have it both ways on this. He talked about this amendment, which I opposed, this gay amendment that Bush really didn't support, but also 1996, we had the Defense of Marriage Act, which would stop one state from forcing another state to recognize a gay marriage. John Kerry opposed that, which was basically the same position that John Kerry took.
You're making our point.
This time. Well, yeah, what I'm saying is John Kerry, no, what I'm saying, though, is John Kerry was trying to have it both ways on this issue, like so many other issues, because his position, which was let it be up to the individual states, is what he voted against and called homophobic in 1996.
We've got some big news developments. If we're interested in following the ritual that's coming before us tonight, and it is taking place right now, Chris Heinz, who's of course Teresa Heinz's son, is getting ready to, there he is, heading toward his father's house. And then we're going to hear from Nora O'Donnell right now about what the trappings of victory are going to look like at the White House and in Washington. Nora.
A couple of important points, Chris, some news to report. Mary Beth Cahill, who is the campaign manager for Senator John Kerry, has just released a statement, and I will read it to you. The statement says, the vote count in Ohio has not been completed. There are more than 250,000 remaining votes to be counted. We believe when they are, John Kerry will win Ohio. So clearly, Senator Kerry is not conceding the state of Ohio. At this moment, we're in a wait-and-see pattern, if you will, here at the White House. The president has summoned the news photographers up to his residence, presumably to take pictures of him at a historic or momentous occasion. Also, the president's senior staff his top advisors, Karl Rove, Karen Hughes, Dan Bartlett, Chief of Staff, all summoned to the president's residence as well to be with him at this moment. Vice President Cheney, his motorcade, has left the vice presidential residence. So there are a bunch of different things that are sort of happening right now, presumably leading to some sort of culmination of this evening. But clearly from the Kerry side, they are not conceding the state of Ohio. And the president, of course, has not yet reached the magical number of 270. This night was to end with the president going over to the Ronald Reagan Federal Building, where there are thousands waiting to hear from the president, where he will make either an acceptance speech or presumably a concession speech. They are waiting for him. It appears they certainly want to go over there. We know they've been itching to get over there. I spoke moments ago with a very top official at the president's campaign headquarters, very close with the president, who said he is feeling ecstatic. They credit where they are at this race right now to a very disciplined candidate, very disciplined campaign. And I think, Chris, when we are able to sort of look back and reflect on what has happened today and what the Bush-Cheney campaign has done, there'll be a very interesting story. And as you know quite well, the Democrats have always beat the Republicans when it comes to turnout. Traditionally, they have always done better. This year and the past several years, the Republicans have been working to reverse that. And they had quite a ground war going on today, and I think that's reflected certainly in some of the states and how they turned out tonight. Chris?
Okay, Nora, down at the White House with the plans down there and the trappings perhaps of victory. Let's go to Carl Quintanilla and see if it's reciprocated up there in Massachusetts. Carl, are we seeing defiance on the part of the Kerry team?
Well, just before that statement came out from Mary Beth Cahill, Chris, we had asked some of the top officials at the campaign whether or not Ohio was finished, and their response was, we don't agree with your assessment of Ohio, meaning ours here on this platform, NBC's. Of course, some of the other networks have not called Ohio yet. They pointed that out. So there is a sense that once that statement was made, it is formal. They believe that once these 250,000 votes are counted, that John Kerry will win the state. This is a keeping in what they had said previously in general terms, and that was that John Kerry would be obviously more reticent to concede anything tonight if the race in fact turned out to be close. He did spend a number of his closing days in Ohio, Youngstown, the last 2 days, Cleveland and Toledo. It was a full-bore effort to win over that state, and clearly, Chris, it's something they're not willing to let go of easily.
Who is advising Kerry with regard to this? Is he lawyered up? Is it people like Schrum, the real hard-fighting ideologue of the campaign? Is it Mary Beth? Can you tell who's really saying don't quit?
Well, that's unclear, Chris. I mean, he certainly has a number of people who are extremely skilled in the ground game. Michael Hooley, of course, who was with the DNC, John Sasso. Shrum's more of a strategist type. Mary Beth Cahill, though, obviously steering this to some degree. One of the things about this campaign that really differentiated it from his campaign that was faltering back in Iowa late last year was the lack of any kind of strong ground game, a lack of any strong organizational strategy. That may be the strength now they're definitely trying to leverage, Chris.
Okay, Carl, thank you very much. Let us know if anything happens there in terms of a statement, because we did hear earlier, Carl, you told us, in fact, that's how we know that Kerry was planning to address the troops sometime tonight or early tomorrow morning. In fact, it is already early tomorrow morning. Thank you very much, Carl Quintanilla. Andrea.
They are united in not wanting to concede Ohio. They believe that there are enough votes out there, that enough people were still in line late in the game, and that...
What about the deficit in Cayuga County?
But if you consider counting provisional and absentee ballots, they think that they can make it up, or they're going to check... I mean, they are going to insist on a count. This is
Where are the strong Democratic areas that might reach this goal of, say, 2/3, 2 out of every 3 voters going Democratic?
It would have to be in Cleveland. I mean,
but I thought they were already facing a shortfall.
That's the thing.
But they haven't counted absentees.
They've already shut down the urban areas for the most part. I mean, it's the rural areas.
That's according to the Republican chairman and
No, I mean, that's according to that report. But again, we also heard from Chris Jansing earlier this evening. We also heard, though, from Chris Jansing earlier this evening that Cleveland was underreporting.
Exactly.
Listen, and Dee Dee's been on the phone all night. The numbers are not adding up. Listen, I've got no problem with them holding on as long as they want to hold on. But let's not fool ourselves. This doesn't smell like 2000.
We're going to get right back because there are a lot of other states in the Great Lakes states, certainly Wisconsin, Iowa, Minnesota, haven't been counted yet thoroughly enough for us to make a call. Any two of those states could bring the president beyond that 270 necessary to win the Electoral College victory he so much seeks right now tonight. Let's come back with some more numbers to count. We'll be back with my colleague Keith Oberman with more results, more calls, more information on how this country of ours is taking shape. Look at that green out there in the north, up there in the northern Midwest, and over there in the southwest. More states to count tonight when we come back.